All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome if you're new. Doing something a little bit different today. And I just realized that I have to readjust this because you can see my podcast background here. There we go. But yeah, thank you guys for waiting patiently. I don't normally do live streams like this randomly or spontaneously during the week. So I figured, a lot of you guys really do enjoy the streams. A lot of you guys enjoy the podcasts we do every Sunday. And I realize it's been quite some time since I've done a stream like this. And I was thinking about just producing a normal video, but I figured, you know what? I have a lot to say about this topic in particular today. And, I just figured we could just do a different format here. So, you guys let me know how you feel about this format, if you enjoy it. Maybe we could start doing more weekly streams. I do worry about doing weekly streams because I don't want to take too much content away from the podcast. But I know that there are some of you that don't really care too much, and you're just like, I'll hang out with you all day, MBG, if you stream all day. And I appreciate that. I think that's awesome. So, yeah, I wanted to do the little intro as well, the intro credits roll, to give people time to kind of file in as well. Because, again, most people probably weren't aware I was doing this. But as you can see with my title, did Microsoft really just say this? I'm laughing because if you look at the title here, Microsoft suggests Call of Duty would be optimized for PlayStation if its Activision deal goes through. And you're probably thinking, oh my God, is that really what they said? Did they really say that? And I just realized now that I actually have the wrong article up. So give me a second to actually correct that. That's pretty funny. That actually is another thing that I was thinking about talking about. But that, in fact, is not what I wanted to do. Here it is. Here's the one that I want to bring up. That's pretty funny. Like, oh man, what did Microsoft say? They must have said something crazy to make MBG do a random stream in the middle of the week. Yeah, it said they're going to optimize. They're going to optimize for PlayStation. Can you believe the absurdity? No, but this is really what I want to talk about because I kept trying to record a video on this, and I do have a video recorded on it. I might still release that video for people who don't like the long-form live streams, but I just kept having to redo the recording or edit the recording or whatever because I realized that I'm going on and on and on and on, and I have so much to say. So I figured, hey, podcast format. Matt Thornton, you're saying it's an unpopular opinion, but all I'm hearing from Microsoft is, quote, we need Call of Duty because we haven't had a good exclusive in over a decade, end quote. Well, Matt, look, I'll let you know, some people are going to assume that this stream, and let me adjust this here, move myself more to the, all right. Some people are going to assume that this stream is simply going to be me complaining about Microsoft. And I will admit there will be some complaining, but I think it's kind of warranted because with this whole situation, and I'm sure many of you have seen this, if you are more of a PlayStation fan or you play on PlayStation, you just like PlayStation, and maybe you follow gaming news, you follow different outlets, maybe you follow YouTubers and whatnot. You've certainly noticed that when it comes to this entire Activision Blizzard deal, a lot of people have had very negative things to say. And if you've been following me on the channel, you'll know there are some times where I come to Sony's defense, but there are also many times where I also point out some of the things that Sony is saying or doing that are, hypocritical, that are certainly worth maybe making fun of a little bit if you're not a fan of Sony, whatever. But during this entire situation, Microsoft has also been positioning themselves as, for lack of a better term, the good guys. And they've been doing this pretty successfully. They've been playing the media, working the media, playing the gamers, the consumers. And I'm not saying it's all bad. For example, like if you're a consumer that says, dude, I like Game Pass because it saves me money, then yeah, more power to you, man. I like saving money as well. That's great. But there's no denying that Microsoft has been, in my opinion, trying to have their cake and eat it too. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise because it's business, right? It shouldn't come as a surprise that mega corporations with vested interests, they want to have their cake and eat it too. And they will try to make that happen if it seems like it's a possibility. And what we're seeing here, in my opinion, with this VGC article and what Microsoft recently said to the CMA, or the Competition Markets Authority, as well as Sony, in my opinion, Microsoft has finally made it clear what their intention is. Now, I want to preface this by making it known that a lot of people already know what Microsoft's intention ultimately is. A lot of people are not falling for, the headlines that are either biased or slanted, whatever it might be. Some people would argue that sometimes I'm biased and slanted. I try my best not to be. But one thing I've been saying ad nauseum with this entire Activision Blizzard situation is that there is no good or bad guy here. I understand that it's easy to make fun of Sony, like I said, and it might even be easy to take Microsoft's side here and basically say Microsoft's so pro-consumer and they're great for the industry. This is ultimately a good thing. I get that. I understand that this is how it's going to be. But what we are seeing here from Microsoft and what they said to the CMA recently is very important to highlight, because what they're basically saying, well, there are two things, okay? Before we read the article, because we will read the article, I want to basically summarize to you and give you the gist as to what Microsoft is saying to the regulatory bodies and to Sony. Now, it's also worth noting before I give you the gist that Microsoft is speaking to the CMA. This is the UK's regulatory body. This is a regulatory body that has been very much against this deal and, basically is siding with Sony in that they are not convinced that they should pass this and let it go through. Outside of the UK regulatory body, we have the EU. The EU, obviously, Microsoft has been talking to them. We don't know where they stand. Maybe they're going to be convinced. The FTC, on the other hand, North America's regulatory body, they are suing Microsoft. So the CMA, that's who Microsoft is talking to here. To give you the gist, this is what Microsoft is telling the CMA and telling Sony. Number one, we believe that 10 years is a sufficient, as they're putting it, a sufficient amount of time for Sony to create their own Call of Duty alternatives. Gotta love that wording. Gotta love the wording. It's important that we pay attention to the word alternatives. Not a competitor. No. Not a competitor. An alternative. Okay? Because maybe, just maybe, Microsoft realizes how ridiculous it would sound to say that Sony could create a Call of Duty competitor in a matter of 10 years. Some people believe it could happen. I mean, maybe. It's not impossible, I don't think, but certainly not likely. That's the first thing that Microsoft is telling Sony and telling the CMA. 10 years is a sufficient amount of time. And the second thing Microsoft is saying that I think is also very interesting is this is the first time we are witnessing Microsoft put their foot down, draw the line, and say, we are not going to sign a deal beyond 10 years. And that's why. That's why they're not signing a deal beyond 10 years. Now, this is really important, in my opinion, to go over because to me, I don't know if other people are going to interpret it this way. To me, this very clearly shows Microsoft's true agenda, which I want to make it clear is not necessarily a good or bad thing. That's a different topic, and we'll probably cover it here. But I'm saying that for people who are falling for the things that Microsoft has been saying, as in like basically playing the good guy, and they're going above and beyond to give Sony a 10-year deal, right? They're going above and beyond to give Sony a 10-year deal, even though they originally only offered Sony 3 years, and they definitely had no intention of offering them 10 years. I want to talk about this because there's also a massive, massive irony here that I could not believe Microsoft actually said this. But then again, we look at the things that both Sony and Microsoft have been saying. Maybe it's all ultimately not that surprising, but I really just thought, like, Microsoft, you're the one saying this? You're the one saying this. Check this out. It's not going to come up on screen, but I'm over on Twitter right now, okay? And this article that I have up right now, on Twitter, VGC said, Microsoft has said 10 years is long enough for Sony to develop rival offerings to the Call of Duty franchise should Xbox acquire Activision's shooter series. I quote tweeted this, and this is what I said. Microsoft is the last publisher that should be making claims like this. In fact, if what they are saying is true, they wouldn't need to buy Activision or Bethesda. Microsoft has had ample time to do the exact same thing they are claiming their competition should do. Do you guys understand this? Do you understand the absolute absurd hypocrisy in this notion that Microsoft is putting forth? Now, don't get me wrong. Sony has put forth some absurd notions themselves, but they're being pretty honest about it. I mean, we can dunk on Sony and we can clown Sony for being scared. Yes, they are. Jim Ryan isn't hiding the fact that they are absolutely terrified of what Microsoft will do with Call of Duty if they get it. Jim Ryan is also not hiding the fact that, yes, we are the same company that signs exclusivity deals, and yes, we sign deals with Call of Duty, still remains multi-platform, but, we get an exclusive operator skin, some exclusive experience point, double XP, some ridiculous nonsense like that. Yes, we get that stuff. But the point is, Sony doesn't seem to be hiding or straying away from the fact that you kind of, you come off as a little bit hypocritical in the public eye, and it's not a great look. And people are probably going to dunk on you for it. And believe me, when you look at the amount of crying Jim memes that are out there, yes, Sony is getting dunked on. But this is where I'm so glad to finally see that it turns out it's not just Sony. It turns out that Microsoft, as a company, can also, believe it or not, be incredibly hypocritical and say some really ridiculous stuff. And that's exactly what I think this is. I think it's insane. I think it's insane that this is the same company who has spent decades trying to create their own games to compete against Sony as well as Nintendo. They even had a top-tier first-person shooter in Halo. And I think most people would agree that at one point in time, Halo was considered a viable competitor to Call of Duty. And if it wasn't yet, it definitely could have been if it was nurtured properly. But look at what Microsoft does. They ruin it. They screw it up. And what do they end up doing? They say, well, you know what? Shit. Turns out we can't make a Call of Duty competitor. Turns out Halo is not driving people to Game Pass or to Xbox. So we need to buy Call of Duty. That's what's going to drive people to Game Pass and the Xbox. And that's fine. That's what you got to do to win. Go for it. They're going for it. But holy shit, you're actually going to come out here and say to Sony, you guys got this. 10 years is more than enough, bro. For an alternative, not a competitor, an alternative. An alternative. What is an alternative? Is an alternative a competitor? Because I could say Halo is a Call of Duty alternative, but not a very good one. You could say that Killzone at one point could have been a Call of Duty alternative, but nowhere near as popular. And in some cases, some people didn't think it was nearly as good. You see, this is why I really am bothered by the back and forth here, because people don't want to recognize that Microsoft, just like Sony, is a mega corporation. Although I will say that Microsoft is significantly larger than Sony. And that these corporations, these companies, get where they get to the top, where they fight to become these big corporate giant entities, not by being a nice guy, so to speak, not by being the good guy, not by, being charitable and caring so much about the consumer that the only thing that matters is you get the best deal. No. The only thing that matters to Microsoft is that they get Call of Duty and they get to wait it out. They get to wait it out because Microsoft knows full fucking well that Sony, while they can, because I know what some people are going to say. Some people are going to say, of course Sony can make a Call of Duty competitor. Or, not competitor, alternative. Alternative. Sony can make a Call of Duty alternative. They can make many over the course of a decade. They could bring back Killzone. They could bring back whatever. Yeah, MAG, SOCOM. The sky's the limit. But let me ask you, does anybody realistically, truly, in your heart of hearts believe that over the next 10 years, suddenly Sony's going to have a first-person shooter that usurps Call of Duty? Or maybe it doesn't usurp it, but at the very least, people are talking about in the same... Wow, my cats are idiots. People are talking about in the same way? Are people really going to be talking about whatever this game is in the same way that they're talking about Call of Duty? Is it going to be able to prevent... This is the most important part. Is a Call of Duty alternative from Sony, even if it's really good, is it going to be able to prevent the amount of people that will potentially leave the PlayStation platform a decade from now when Microsoft pulls the rug out from underneath Sony? I think the reason why Microsoft chose to use the word alternative and not competitor is because they know the answer to that question is a big fat no. No chance. Now, I also want to talk about how Microsoft made it clear. Microsoft made it clear, and I want to show you. All right? We will read the entire article, but just for the sake of, getting to the point here. Where is it? Okay. It says it right here. In Microsoft's newly published response to the CMA, it noted that the 10-year term is longer than or equal to previous licensing remedies imposed in other mergers. Quote, while Microsoft is prepared to continue to discuss this constructively with the CMA, there is no basis for extending the remedy beyond the period proposed by Microsoft. Translation, we are not negotiating a contract beyond 10 years. Now, here's where this gets particularly interesting to me, because if we are to believe Microsoft, and if Sony, right, maybe not us, let's not talk about us or the consumer, because the consumer, I don't know, you can go either way with it. Believe him, don't believe him, doesn't make a difference. But for all those who say that Sony is being ridiculous, Sony is being nonsensical, and Sony just needs to shut up, stop crying, and sign the deal, and just believe Microsoft. Because here's what Microsoft says. Microsoft says it doesn't make any business sense for us to remove Call of Duty from PlayStation. Now, that statement does make sense. Yeah, I agree. That makes a lot of money. Why would you want to lose that money? Now, look at it from the perspective of Microsoft. Microsoft probably thinks, well, yeah, yeah, we could just rake in that money for the next decade. And then, maybe suddenly by the 11th or 12th year, when there's no more contract, suddenly it makes perfect business sense to take Call of Duty. Now, again, I'm somebody who doesn't care about Call of Duty. They can have it. But surely you can kind of see from Sony's perspective why they're maybe not so keen to just sign a 10-year deal. Now, some people might say, well, hold on now. You know what? Let me back up. Going with the whole makes business sense. Microsoft claims that it doesn't make business sense to pull Call of Duty from PlayStation. To me, it also doesn't make much business sense to work Game Pass the way they are. To me, that doesn't make much business sense. In fact, I think a lot of people would say, yeah, that doesn't make much business sense. It turns out that when you have as much money as Microsoft does, business sense doesn't have to be at the forefront. Long-term planning is what matters. I mean, does it need to make business sense if you can continue to operate at a loss for the next 1,000 years? But all you really need is maybe a decade or two before your competition can't do it, can't compete. Just saying that's how these businesses think. But I also want to point out that some people might say, well, 10 years, that's a long time. And you're right. A decade is a long ass time, no doubt. And Sony getting Call of Duty for 10 years would be good, ultimately. However, my question to Microsoft is simple. It's really this simple. And I know that people will respond by saying, dude, no one's going to go beyond 10 years. And I have yet to see people have said over and over, or at least I've heard people say that no one's going to offer a deal beyond 10 years. That's ridiculous. But I have yet to hear somebody explain to me why that's ridiculous. Why is a 15-year deal that much more ridiculous than a 10-year deal? Or an 18-year deal? Or even a 20-year deal? I'm not saying it isn't a long-ass time, but that's the thing. Sony is calling Microsoft's bluff. Microsoft is fucking lying. And everyone at Sony knows it. And a lot of people in the public, for some reason, either A, don't know it, or B, don't care to know it. And again, if you're somebody who says, I don't care about any of this shit, I'm on the sideline eating popcorn, I respect that. That's fine. I'm not saying you have to. But if you are paying attention to this and you do care about the long term, how this is going to affect the long term and the bigger picture, then we have to acknowledge that Sony is essentially calling Microsoft's bluff by saying they're not going to offer us more than 10 years because their long-term plan is to take Call of Duty away from any platform that doesn't offer Game Pass. It couldn't be more clear. And people absolutely expect Sony to just say, okay, sure. Why not? Even I at times want Sony to be that way because I'm tired of this. I'm not Sony. It's not my bottom line. I'm not making money off of Call of Duty. I don't give a shit either way. And there are times where I'm like, Sony, this is getting tiring, man. Just give it up. But then I see stuff like this, and it's like, if I was Sony, it's hard, man. It would be difficult to not want to twist Microsoft's arm as much as I could. And that's the thing. People are out here acting like Microsoft's such a great company. Look at that. They're offering 10-year deals. Nintendo gets a 10-year deal. Valve gets a 10-year deal. This cloud gaming company I never even heard of and knew existed gets a 10-year deal. And Sony can get a 10-year deal. Everything's great. 10-year deals all around. Two problems with that line of thinking. Number one, last time I checked, no deals were ever needed. It turns out that Activision remaining an independent company and publisher means no deals need to be made like that. Call of Duty will always be everywhere if it's able to be everywhere. People want to make it sound like, oh, well, without Microsoft, a Nintendo Switch version of Call of Duty wouldn't exist. How do you know that? You don't know that. If anything, it's more logical to think that a new iteration of the Switch is coming out not too long from now. They're probably looking at that being like, yo, we can probably put Call of Duty on there. Microsoft comes in at just the right time. Hey, we're going to put Call of Duty on Game Pass or on a Nintendo Switch, even though that was already happening. Right? The other problem with it is how people seem to want to ignore the fact that 10-year contract that everyone is signing so happily only exists because of Sony being a pain in Microsoft's ass. People want to talk about Jim Ryan crying, Sony being, unreasonable and just being, being ridiculous about this whole thing. I think people forget that Microsoft originally went to Sony and said, yeah, we'll give you 3 years. We'll give you 3 years. Let me ask you, Microsoft, do you think Sony would have been able to create a viable alternative, as you put it, in 3 years? And I'm pretty sure the answer to that is no. I'm pretty sure that if anything is to be understood, it's that, let's just get down to it. Microsoft wants to kick the shit out of Sony. And people need to stop pretending that that's not what's going on here. Microsoft absolutely has an axe to grind with Sony. And this didn't just happen. Microsoft has an axe to grind with Sony because Sony kicked the shit out of them. Microsoft has to buy Activision Blizzard because they couldn't compete. Microsoft had to buy Bethesda because they couldn't compete. Microsoft had to create Game Pass and create a whole new way that people can experience games because they couldn't compete. But Microsoft is also the same company that says, you know what? That's not good enough. Why isn't it good enough? Because it turns out it's not fucking profitable or sustainable in its current form. How do we make it profitable? How do we make it sustainable? Oh, I know. Let's just buy must-have fucking games and own them. And only make it so that you can play these games on our service. What do people think Microsoft was going to do if Sony signed that 3-year contract? I mean, really, what do you think they were going to do? You think Microsoft was going to say, thanks for signing that 3-year contract, Sony. See ya. Enjoy Call of Duty for the next 3 years, because once that shit's up, we're gone. Call of Duty's gone, baby. This is the same company. This is the same company that had no problem pulling Starfield and is going to have absolutely no problem, just like they made it clear, pulling the Elder Scrolls 6. Microsoft says, oh, we're not going to pull anything that already exists. Yeah, of course not. You're not going to say, well, we're not selling Modern Warfare 2 on PlayStation anymore. No, but what you will do is, I don't know, what version of Modern Warfare will we be on by the year 2035 or 36? God knows. But they will pull that version because that's a new game. That's a new Call of Duty game, and every Call of Duty game that comes out after that is a new Call of Duty game. And once Microsoft is not beholden to that contract, they can do whatever the fuck they want. And what Microsoft wants to do as a multi-trillion-dollar company is win. Because it turns out you don't become a multi-trillion-dollar behemoth of a company by playing nice with the competition. People will shit on Sony because Sony is, yes, they are scared and they are doing what they are obligated to do for their shareholders, for their players, for their brand. And it may come off as bitchy and as like, like they're throwing a tantrum and they're having a meltdown. But you know what? I think it's utterly insane to think that if you were in charge of PlayStation, if you were in charge of Sony, hate to break it to you, if you were in Jim Ryan's position and you just fucking signed that contract, that 3-year contract, or even that 10-year contract, and you didn't do anything beyond that, you'd probably lose your job. You probably would. You'd probably lose your job, and they'd say we need somebody else in here. Because I want to reiterate, the only reason these concessions that Microsoft is offering with Call of Duty exist, the only reason these concessions exist in the first place is not because Microsoft, out of the kindness of their heart, said we should offer concessions to these other platforms. No, it's because Sony said, hey, Sony or Microsoft, we're not cool with this. We need a deal. And people will say, and I'm not saying it's wrong, they will say, well, what right does Sony have? It's not about who has a right to do what. What right does Microsoft have to just buy publishers? What right does Sony have to sign exclusivity deals? What right does Microsoft have to make the Elder Scrolls 6 exclusive? It's not about who has the right or who doesn't. It's not about right or wrong. It's about business. It's about who's going to do what. And I'm not sitting here saying that Sony is innocent. I'm sitting here saying that Microsoft is just as guilty. And they're about to be on a whole nother level of guilty in the long run once this deal goes through. I'm going to read a couple of these super chats. Let me see. Kipford, you're saying, in your opinion, this confirms they plan to take Call of Duty off. It absolutely does. Again, let me ask you, why wouldn't Microsoft, a company who is absolutely in full desperation mode right now to get this to go through, they will do almost anything to get this to go through. Why are they out here putting their foot down saying we are not agreeing to a contract beyond 10 years? We are not doing it. Why? Why? How come you were so cool at 3 years? How come you're so cool at 10 years? Suddenly 15 years is like, whoa, man. Because you keep telling us that your intention is to keep Call of Duty on everything, including places where Game Pass doesn't exist. That's what you keep telling us. So if that's true and you're not fucking lying, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong with a contract that goes beyond 10 years? I need somebody to explain that to me. Now, the most reasonable, rational explanation I could see somebody giving is that no company, it's not smart. That's why. It would be a dumb thing for Microsoft to offer a contract beyond 10 years. But that's what I don't get. If your ultimate goal is to just get this through because it's not actually about Call of Duty, then why would it be that dumb? Hernaday, you're saying, do you want the answer? I mean, yeah, I would be, I would like somebody to just let me know. Cause I mean, maybe there is a reason that I'm not aware of, but I'm just speaking very broadly, very generally here. And, from a position where I have to, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know all of the ins and outs, but I'm just saying if Microsoft's willing, I also just want to say that the way Microsoft frames this, it's almost like Sony did ask for a longer contract. You know what I mean? Like they say 10 years is sufficient. It's almost like Microsoft is saying themselves that they are aware that they might be asked to do a longer contract. Their end game is to put Game Pass on PlayStation. Yeah, that you're right. Why is this hurting you, MBG? This triggered you that much that you went streaming on a Tuesday? Well, honestly, dude, I'm playing into it here. I would much rather be talking about a new Spider-Man 2 trailer or something that dropped, but it's just, this is all that came out today. And I'm just like, dude, I really hope people call Microsoft out on this. That's all I'm saying. Call it crying, call it being hurt, call it whatever you want. But what I hope to see is people calling out Microsoft on the utter hypocrisy here, just like they're so quickly willing to do so for Sony. You know, that's all it is. I'm just saying, like, we have to keep this as fair as we can. I have my own bias. Everybody has their own bias, whether they're going to admit it or not in this situation. But just like I can say, okay, yeah, that's fair. Sony's looking awful stupid crying about exclusivity for Call of Duty when they have, like, literally on all of their marketing for Call of Duty, like, PlayStation exclusive, whatever. It looks pretty fucking stupid. But this to me also looks just as stupid, where it's like, hold on, Microsoft, you're sitting here telling me, as a company who failed so hard to compete and make your own good games, and you have to buy publishers and IP to make up for that. You think you're the one that should be telling a regulatory body and Sony that 10 years is more than enough? You got to be kidding me. That's ridiculous. Like, that is absolutely ridiculous. Sony isn't crying, they're doing business. I mean, yeah, that's the thing, man, is like, you know, you can get a lot of opinions from people like me and everybody else on the internet. Don't give their 2 cents on this situation, but the reality is, you're damn right. Like, that's all it comes down to. Business is business. Microsoft's doing business, Sony's doing business. Turns out business can be ugly. You know? It can be ugly. But that's the thing, is I don't work for Sony, nor do I work for Microsoft. It's not my job to take care of PlayStation, just like it's not my job to take care of Microsoft. In fact, as a consumer and an enthusiast, if anything, my job is to just take a look at what's going on and give my thoughts on it. And I know, you know, I've seen plenty of people respond by saying, dude, you know, no one should be able to tell Microsoft what they can and can't do with their money. If Microsoft wants to buy a publisher, they should be allowed to do so. That's the name of the game. You know, if Sony could buy publishers, they would do it. And that's where, you know, at some point, it's like, okay, from a very objective standpoint with zero emotion and zero anything involved, yeah, I get that. Like, maybe you shouldn't tell somebody how to spend their money. But I hate that argument, because it's like, you're ignoring every single nuance. It's not even that nuanced, actually. You're ignoring everything that could happen because of something like this. You're ignoring all of the potential downsides as well as benefits, right? And you're just saying, oh, well, and to me, like, that's not interesting to me. That's not interesting to me, because if that's how things were, truthfully, if anybody could just buy anybody for any, and there was nothing stopping them, then it would be absolute insanity. It would be absolute insanity. Everybody would be buying everybody. And I don't know what the industry would look like at that point. And that's another concern I have with this. You know, it's just that, look, I get why Microsoft's doing what they're doing, but if Microsoft pushes this through, it seems to me like the floodgates are going to open. It does. It seems like the floodgates are going to open, and at that point, you know, everybody's going to kind of be looking around and be like, so you're saying we could get away with buying these guys? Like, we wouldn't, you know what I mean? Granted, I will say that seeing how difficult it is for Microsoft, it might not be that easy. But, or, you know, the fact that it might not be that easy might stop people. But let me continue reading these super chats. Have New Soul 9, or sorry, Jerome. You're saying, to be fair, 10 years is plenty of time, just saying, LOL. Well, you're not wrong. Again, as I said earlier, 10 years is a long time. 10 years is a long time, and I fully believe that Sony is in the process of trying to do something. You know, obviously they do have some deals to get some first-person shooters, and, you know, probably things we don't even know about yet. And one of these games could end up being like a huge mega hit. We don't know, but what we do know, like, the only thing we can say definitively is that to get to Call of Duty's status is incredibly unlikely and incredibly difficult. And if Sony in the long run, after the 10-year contract is up, does lose Call of Duty, we can say definitively that will really severely hurt Sony. It won't end them, but it will damage them quite significantly. And, it's one of these things where, yeah, I don't think Sony's investors, I don't think anybody who has a vested interest in Sony would be happy if Sony just came out, if Jim Ryan just came out and said, you know what, we'll sign the 10-year deal and we'll just make our own. And that's what we're going to do. And if we lose all that money, eventually, well, nothing we can do about it. We just signed the contract. If Sony right now is in a mode where it's like Microsoft saying, we're not going to give you more than a 10-year deal. I don't know, man. If enough pressure is applied, Sony said it themselves that the only time Sony's willing to talk to them is when the public eye is on them, when they are being scrutinized, when they're being looked at more closely by the regulators. This is the only time Microsoft is willing to talk to Sony. This is why I'm saying, people need to stop falling for this nice guy bullshit that Microsoft is putting forth. They're not trying to do good business with Sony. They're trying to just get this shit through as quickly as they can and just shut Sony up. That's what Microsoft's trying to do. They're trying to shut Sony up and get them to stop, because Sony is the one that is causing this whole thing to be such a, they really threw a wrench in this whole thing. And it does all come down to Call of Duty. Saying that now would be a good time for Sony to bring back SOCOM. I agree, man. I hope we do get that out of this. I would love to see SOCOM. Jay saying, do I blame them? No. That's the thing. Is I don't blame Microsoft for being annoyed and just wanting to be like, dude, 10 years is enough, bro. But that's why I'm saying, if I was Microsoft and I know Sony's not stupid, Sony knows I'm trying to fuck them over, ultimately, I'm not going to expect, the only reason Microsoft is playing nice is because they have to. They have to be a good guy. They got to smile and say, oh, yeah, you know what? What were we thinking? 3 years? You're right, Sony. That is not adequate. We'll go for 10 years. And then Sony's like, nah, bro. 10 years ain't good enough. Dude, Microsoft is fuming. Microsoft is sitting there what do you mean 10 years isn't good enough? What do you mean 10 years isn't good enough, Sony? And it's just people act like they wouldn't be doing the exact same shit if they were in Sony's shoes. All right, New Soul 9, you're saying, MBG, you need to consider that Activision and Bethesda wanted to sell. It's not really Microsoft's fault. You expect them to say no. They didn't force them. That's a good point, New Soul 9. That is a good point and a fair point. And I will say that it does create a situation where, I don't think a company that wants to sell and a buyer comes along, I don't think there's anything wrong with them being like, well, hell yeah, let's go, And I don't think there's anything wrong with a company that sees that opportunity and says, we should do that. But what I do think makes this whole situation murky is that you do also have to consider why a company is selling in the first place. And you do, in my opinion, absolutely have to take a good long look at who is buying them and why and what they're planning on doing with them. Because I think a lot of people, we talk about, Microsoft's spending $68 billion. And we just talk about it so much. We see that number thrown around so much that it's practically become meaningless. Where it's I think when people actually take a moment, really try to fathom how much money that is. You know what I mean? And how it's just, that's not, you really got to wonder, what is the long-term play here? $68 billion? It's obvious. A company that spends $68 billion on a single publisher, their intention is clear as day. The regulators know it, and the competition knows it. And Microsoft may be able to throw up some, some pie chart to the regulators in Brussels that looks like Sony's Pac-Man eating up Xbox, you know? But what Microsoft won't admit is that, yeah, we couldn't compete. This is the only, and well, actually, what they are admitting is this is the only way we can compete. And that's pretty shitty, in my opinion, Like, at that point, it's like, look, I don't buy that for a second. I just don't buy this notion that it's like, well, every game we make seems to kind of suck. And every game we make, it doesn't seem to be good enough to grow Game Pass. So we got to buy shit that's already really good and established, And we also, we got to do that while simultaneously trying to convince people that we're not just basically paying to win here, Again, I'm not saying that Sony's innocent and hasn't partook in this type of behavior, but it's just like, one day Microsoft woke up and Microsoft said, you know what, we're done playing by the rule book. We're done, we could go out there and buy third-party exclusivity deals, but we're not going to. Instead, we're just going to buy the games, like, and own them forever. And, that's where it's like, I don't know, man. That I don't know how people can just kind of talk about that behavior as if it's not jarring, right? As if it's not like, what's going on here? MBG, you sound really sour. You picked the wrong side. Well, I just want it to be known, man, that like, I mean, I know I sound salty. I know I sound sour, and I get it. And trust me, like I said, I wish that there was, like, I wish RE4 came out today and I could be making a stream talking about that. But I don't expect there to be like protection for Sony. It's not about that. Like, the reality is, I'm not worried about Sony losing Call of Duty. In fact, I've explained numerous times that to me, it's actually a bit tantalizing to see a Sony and a PlayStation that can't really rely on Call of Duty in the same way anymore. That is tantalizing to me because that means Sony's going to have to change how they operate and do things differently. And that could be for better or for worse, but at the very least, it'll be potentially exciting to see what they do. But that doesn't, just as Sony can still have Call of Duty on the platform and still make their own shooters and still want to have Call of Duty on their platform. Call of Duty existed when Killzone existed. It's not like Sony was like, well, we don't give a fuck about Call of Duty. We got Killzone. Just as Sony and Microsoft want to have both, Microsoft wants Halo and Call of Duty, right? I too also feel like, well, I don't really personally care about Call of Duty or what's going on with Activision Blizzard. But at the same time, it's getting pretty fucking irritating to see people making it sound like, to basically see people rallying behind Microsoft, not really fully understanding, like, dude, why do you seem to believe that Microsoft is your fucking friend and that they want to be nice to you? Like, are you kidding me? When I'm out here hyping up Sony, I'm hyping up their fucking games, man. I'm hyping up the shit that they do best. And I get it. If you want to hype up, well, dude, they're going to give me Call of Duty and Game Pass. That's fine. That's fine, bro. I get that. But you got to know that Microsoft is not doing that shit to do you a fucking favor. And this is why I wanted to highlight this, because if there's anything that proves to you really what Microsoft is trying to do here, it's not to be your friend. It's not to give you the best deal. It's to find a way to win. Not to compete, to win. Because when they win, well, that's when things change. That's when things change. Jerome, you're saying, so you did a stream in the middle of the week because it bothers you that people in media are leaning on Microsoft's side and picking on PlayStation? Real question. To a degree. I mean, it's not so much that, like, oh man, stop picking on my man Jim Ryan. It's look, as a PlayStation content creator, I have to come out here when when Sony is making statements and Sony's saying things. And yeah, when Sony is getting clowned and picked on, as you put it, and shit on by the media and everybody else out there, I'm damned if I do, and I'm damned if I don't. If I ignore it, then people be like, yo, why are you ignoring that, MBG, huh? Why are you ignoring it? You don't want to acknowledge it. But if I acknowledge it and I try to be reasonable with it, suddenly I'm just a biased fanboy. And in fact, there have been many times where I agreed with people. You know what I mean? It's like I'm saying, yeah, dude, Jim Ryan sounds kind of, I don't know, it's not a good look, man, not a good look. What's going on here? There have been many times where I've said, I even said it during the stream, like, I'm ready for Sony to sign the fucking deal. I get why they're not, but I wouldn't complain because from my perspective, I'd be like, finally, this shit is done. I don't have to hear the bickering back and forth. I don't have to see a whole wave of people on the other side who they have a bias. They want this to go through. They want it to go through for one reason or another. I don't have to deal with that anymore. Because now they can just be happy that they got what they wanted. And I got what I wanted because it's over. Unfortunately, the only problem with that is Sony's not going to get what they want. and you know, that again, I'm not Sony, man. Like, that's not my problem. The reason why I'm pointing this out, though, is because for as long as this goes on, and again, as long as Sony is going to hold shit back and not do a damn showcase, right? He's not doing a showcase. Sony's not doing a showcase. They're we got Final Fantasy 16. Things are quiet, but this is what's coming up. Yeah, I'm going to highlight some of the stuff that Sony's saying, I'm going to highlight the stuff that Microsoft is saying. And I also want it to be known that one of the more recent things we talked about, did you guys see? You're saying bring back Sir Speaks a Lot. I don't know where he is, man. I don't know. Did you guys see how it was like a week or two ago? All the headlines, all the media, everybody's dogpiling Jim Ryan. I just want it to be known. This is not me defending Jim Ryan or Sony, because again, that's not my problem. It's my problem to the extent that, well, I got to cover this because I'm a PlayStation channel and I cover things that are going on in PlayStation with PlayStation. And this is the most relevant thing that's happening right now. Everybody dogpiled the hell out of Jim Ryan's comment that we learned about from that Lulu Cheng Maservi chick who works at Activision, who has a vested interest, mind you. And she comes out and she says, oh, Jim Ryan says he doesn't want another deal. He wants your merger blocked. And I'm like, I literally could not believe that people were like, you saw how like the entire Xbox community that is for this deal, they ran with that shit. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Did I not get the memo? Did I not get the memo that said Jim Ryan and Sony do want a Call of Duty deal and they don't want to block this deal? You know what I mean? Like, I could, and if there's anything that really showed me in a moment, like, wow, like, this is, you could tell, like, this is a media war, man. Like, this is a war of words and of perception is what it is. It's a war of perception where you take somebody from fucking Activision who wants this deal to go through because they'll make a shit ton of money. Just have to put that out there. You take somebody from Activision who puts out a tweet in quotes saying Jim Ryan said this, proceeds to type the most obvious thing that Jim Ryan could have said. And suddenly it's like, oh my God. Like, Sony, you done did it now. You know, you done fucked up now. It's like, what the fuck is going on, man? Like, is it like, I could understand if that was your first day waking up to that, where you're like, I have no idea what's happening. Wait, Microsoft's buying Activision Blizzard? And wait, hold on, Jim Ryan said he wants to block. What? I can understand if it's your first time. Like, you were in a coma and you woke up and somebody's catching you up and is like, check this out, bro. I get that. But this is where I promise you, all those people you saw running with Lulu Cheng-Maservi's quote that I'm sure Jim Ryan would fucking say himself publicly if he was allowed. Okay? I don't think Jim Ryan cares. I promise you, all the people you saw running with that shit, I mean full sprint, full speed ahead, let's go. Time to shit on Sony. They will touch this article from VGC and this, what Microsoft just said here, they will, well, let me explain to you exactly why Microsoft said this. And it's like, dude, come the fuck on. I better see those people as outraged as they were about Jim Ryan saying he wants the deal blocked. I want to see those people just as outraged that Microsoft is out here being utterly hypocritical, saying, hey, Sony should be able to make good games in 10 years, even though we couldn't fucking do it. Where's the outrage there? If anything, if I was an Xbox dude and I was reading that this is what Microsoft was saying, I'd be like, bro, why are you saying that? But then again, Microsoft is out here saying we're not as good as Sony. We suck. That's basically what they're saying to the regulators to get this to go through. So I don't know what exactly I expect. I guess I just didn't expect to, just as I said, that everybody's calling out Sony on their hypocrisy, where it's like, yeah, Sony, I gotta admit, man, Sony PlayStation, home of exclusivity, exclusive deals, exclusive marketing, exclusive missions, exclusive games, whatever, I get that's, yes, as a PlayStation fan and enthusiast, I will not deny that exclusivity is the identity of PlayStation, for sure. And the fan base has absolutely leaned into that. And yes, the fan base has leveraged that as ammunition against Xbox and that fan base. Yes. There's no denying this. Therefore, the hypocrisy does exist with a lot of the behavior that Sony is exhibiting. But so does it does with Microsoft as well. So if we can basically look at this situation and identify that it turns out both Sony and Microsoft are willing to stoop to a very low and hypocritical level, if that's what they need to do, then maybe, just maybe, at some point, people who do have any type of bias whatsoever, whether you're consumer bias, as in like, I only care about my bottom line and how much money I'm saving or spending, right? Whether you're PlayStation bias, whether you're Xbox bias, or whether you're somebody who is actually just not really involved, you don't play Activision Blizzard games, you don't play on Xbox, you don't play on Game Pass, whatever, and you're just watching, I think we just all have to kind of universally agree that, maybe at the end of the day, both of these companies just kind of suck right now. You got one company who is so desperate to succeed and win that they have to now buy publishers while simultaneously coming out and basically being like, we suck. That's why we need to buy them. We suck. And they have no shame in doing that. But then we have another company who is doing well and has fought very hard for generations to do well without buying publishers, but by doing other things such as third-party exclusivity deals and getting third-party marketing deals with certain exclusive benefits and stuff. They're coming out here basically making it sound like we're going to die without Call of Duty, completely undermining all of their own successes. So I think ultimately, maybe this takes a turn that people weren't expecting. I think ultimately, when it comes to this entire situation, no matter who you are, we should all just agree to come to the conclusion that this is just ultimately pathetic behavior all around. And it's sad. And I don't think any of it is necessarily right. Because you know what the harsh reality is at the end of the day with this entire situation? If you want to talk looking real big picture here, this goes for both Sony and Microsoft. It's all about money. It's all about money. It's all about market share and who can make the most money and the most profit. And, that's why it's like, look, I know it's capitalism and I know that this is part of capitalism, but I'm sorry. Like sometimes I can't, actually, these days, a lot of times I cannot, in good conscience, cheer on a corporation or a company that is doing what they're doing in the name of, maximizing profitability. And I understand that right now on Microsoft's side of things, it doesn't look that way. On Microsoft's side of things, it looks like they just want to give me the best deal. They want to give me these games and put them in Game Pass. And it's like, yes, I get it. Game Pass is cheap. Game Pass will likely remain cheap for a long time. But surely you understand where this leads in the long run. Like you have to know. You have to know. Like it's not rocket science. I'm not saying it means something bad. I'm just saying you got to see the bigger picture. If you can't see the bigger picture, if you can't see what is trying to be achieved, then you're just going to fall for everything. Saying Sony is the bad guy this generation. I mean, a lot of people would agree with you, for sure. A lot of people would agree with you. And New Soul 9, you're saying, wait, MBG, how are they pulling the rug out if they technically are letting you know in advance? Well, I think it's because the reason why I'm using the terminology pulling the rug out is because everything that Microsoft has said thus far is basically them trying to reassure Sony and the regulators that they have no intention to ever pull Call of Duty. They're talking about it in the same way they're talking about Minecraft, which is, see how we've had Minecraft for almost a decade? And it's funny, it's ironic because it still hasn't even been a decade yet, but it will be next year. And we haven't pulled it. And even new Minecraft games have come to PlayStation. And yes, that is very good because it's like, well, we can look to that as, see, Microsoft won't do it. But we also have to acknowledge that Minecraft, and when that was purchased, this was pre-Game Pass. This was at a time where I will admit, like, I did think maybe there's a chance Microsoft is going to make Minecraft 2 and make that exclusive to Xbox, which would have been pretty funny and crazy. But, it was clear over time. And look, I said at the beginning of the stream that to me, Microsoft's goal is clear. It's clear that they do ultimately want to pull Call of Duty. And the reason why I think this is, and I have to admit, I have to agree with Sony a little bit here. The reason why I think this is because of how they're behaving with Bethesda, where it's like it would make more financial and business sense to release Starfield on PlayStation. It would. It really would. Because if you have Game Pass, you have the ability to offer everybody who's interested in Starfield, don't pay $60, don't pay $70. I think it's going to be $70. Don't pay $70, just pay $10 and you get it. Microsoft has that advantage right now. And what are they choosing to do? No PlayStation version. This is it's same thing's going to happen with the Elder Scrolls. So I understand that like Minecraft exists, Minecraft exists, and they say, well, look at what we did with Minecraft. But to me, it's clear that Minecraft is very much like a one-off in its own, like that's its own thing. So when we look at what they did with Bethesda, a publisher they bought, and then we look at Activision, and Activision's a publisher, I can't blame Sony for basically not believing Microsoft. And again, you asked the question, why are they pulling out the rug? Because to me, the idea that we're going to offer you a 3-year deal, then we're going to change it to a 10-year deal, then we're going to refuse to go beyond 10 years, but then we're going to constantly reassure you that we're not going to pull it after 10 years. To me, that it seems kind of clear that like, so you're saying, like, it reminds me of the the Dumb and Dumber meme where it's like, so you're saying there's a chance. And yeah, like, in fact, what makes it different from that Dumb and Dumber meme is that there's actually a very good chance. There's a good chance. And I just think that, it's in the eyes, I mean, look, people need to understand that Microsoft as well as Sony, they're not looking at this Activision Blizzard deal as like, well, we're just thinking about the next 10 years. They're not. Again, I have to implore people to consider that you're talking about a company spending $68 billion. A company doesn't just decide, we're just going to spend $68 billion. No, a company decides to spend $68 billion after they did all the math and they did all the planning for not 10 years, not 20 years, probably 30 plus years in advance. You're talking about like a 30-year plus plan because $68 billion is absurd. And I fully believe that part of Microsoft's plan is when we reach this key milestone on Game Pass, we will be able to comfortably pull Call of Duty off of PlayStation because the money we make off of PlayStation won't really be needed anymore. And in fact, I would argue that if Microsoft can spend $68 billion like it's nothing to buy Call of Duty, oh wait, yeah, they have trillions of dollars. Yeah, they don't need PlayStation's money, nor do they care about PlayStation's money. This isn't about what makes business sense for Microsoft. It's about their long-term plan. And that's all. Like, that's all I'm trying to say when I say they're going to pull the rug out from under them. And you're saying, like, are they letting them know in advance? I'll be honest, like, no, they're not. I mean, Sony knows. Microsoft knows. Microsoft knows that they don't have to call up Jim Ryan and say, hey, Jim, just so we're both on the same page, Phil Spencer calling Jim, we're going to take Call of Duty, right? Eventually. Like Phil doesn't need to call Jim and say that. Just as Jim knows that he doesn't have to ask them, are you guys going to take Call of Duty eventually? It's like an unwritten thing. Like they both know, they both have knives behind their backs and they're both just trying to convince the regulators right now who has the knife and who doesn't. When in reality, they both have knives behind their backs. And I think that's a good way to visualize it, You're doing a lot of assuming, MBG. Well, yeah, that is true. To be fair, that's all I can do. When I'm reading the reports and I'm reading the things that Sony and Microsoft are saying in these reports, I would love to be a fly on the wall, dude. I would absolutely love to, see what these conversations are like. You saying all I do is assume? Well, I mean, what am I supposed to do? I mean, if I could, if I had Jim Ryan's phone number right now, I'd be like, yo, Jim, doing a stream right now. Got a lot of PlayStation fans here. What's going on? Like I can only assume just like everybody else. And I would actually I want to let you know that even lawyers, as far as I can see, actual lawyers who are covering this, even by the end of their assessments, it's the same thing. Like they can try their best to assume based off of what they know and their knowledge and their understanding and their pedigree, like what will happen, but they all kind of say the same, or at least from what I've seen, everybody says the same thing, which is we kind of don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. And really that's, that's it. We can even take it as far as that's exactly what Sony and Microsoft are doing right now. Sony and Microsoft are basically just assuming. Sony's assuming Microsoft's lying. Microsoft's assuming that they can tell the CMA that we're not signing a deal beyond 10 years and that it'll all work out for them. It's all just assumption. Fred Vance. Sorry, I'm definitely behind here. I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit. I appreciate the super chats, guys. I really appreciate the support. Fred Vance, you're saying Jim Ryan wanted a 10-year parity enforceable clause included for any bugs and patches in which Microsoft refuses to include. And that's the thing, is like I saw, again, you look at how the Xbox fan base is responding to that, how Sony basically says like, well, what's to stop them from basically sabotaging our version of the game? And what Xbox fans turn around and say is, look at that. Sony's projecting. Sony's out here basically revealing what they would do. It's like, dude, you're telling me you wouldn't have that same thought process to your like rival competitor? Like it's a natural thought to have, and it's a natural question to ask. And it's especially a natural question to ask when you don't get a written, like you said, an enforceable agreement that says you can't do that or you'll be in big trouble. You know what I mean? Of course. I'm not, I mean, and I'll be honest, like, do I believe that Microsoft would do that? Well, I don't know, man. Like, I feel like it would be pretty stupid, and that's the thing that gets me with it is like, I understand Sony's paranoia, but I do think at the end of the day, like, that would be a very, very, very bad look for Microsoft. And I think they know that. And it is funny because that other article I had up at the on the screen at the beginning of the stream where it said that Microsoft says that they're going to offer parity. And it's really, dude, it's so funny. It is actually getting comical how far out of their way Microsoft is trying to get this through, where they basically said that, yes, we are going to support every feature that the PS5 offers, even DualSense support. And they even went as far to say, even if that makes the PlayStation version the superior version. And I'm like, oh my God, dude. Like, Microsoft is out here straight up trying to say, we will make a superior PlayStation version. And, and it's so funny, dude. It's so funny because that is something that Microsoft can use against Sony. Oh, what's that, Sony? You want to have a new innovative DualSense controller with haptic feedback and whatnot? We're going to use that against you. You get the superior version of the game. And Sony can't say shit about it. Like, well, damn it. Like, you're right. We do have that feature that you don't. You're right about that. So it's pretty funny, dude. It is pretty funny. New Soul 9, you're saying, Phil saying to Jim Ryan, so, Jim, accept Game Pass yet? Yeah, I mean, let's face it, man. Somebody at the beginning of this, or I don't know if it was the beginning, but recently in the chat said that, the end game here is to get Game Pass on the PlayStation. And yeah, it really is. Pretty much what the end game here for Microsoft truly at the end of the day, and this is going like well beyond this Activision deal, the true end game for Microsoft is very simple. And it's that they want to be able to ensure that Sony cannot be a viable competitor to Game Pass, potentially ever, but certainly for the long haul. That really is what Microsoft, and I will say this is why Microsoft can so effectively slice and dice Sony publicly, because Sony they do not want to take on the Game Pass model for a multitude of reasons. The number one being, doesn't make financial sense for them. If Sony were to copy Game Pass right now, it would sink Sony. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, maybe not 3 years from now, but in the long run, it would sink them. I also want to point out that's why Microsoft needs powerhouses. I mean, true powerhouses. Like, we need the Elder Scrolls 6. We need Call of Duty, right? And we're going to need a lot of other shit on top of that. Why do you think they said after they're done buying Activision that they're not going to stop? Because they need more. This is what Microsoft, if you listen to Microsoft's president speak, you should definitely listen to what he says over Phil Spencer, because, dude, I think Brad Smith is his name, the president of Microsoft. That guy does, in my opinion, makes it pretty fucking clear, like, what they're trying to do. He doesn't really hold back. He obviously can only say so much, but when I listen to him speak, like, it's so obvious, like, dude, he's the president of Microsoft. He's been part of this company for a long time. He knows they all know what they're trying to do there, and what they're trying to achieve. And Microsoft is no stranger to this. That's another important point, is like, they're no stranger to this. People have to ask themselves, why didn't Microsoft shut down Xbox in 2016 or 2017 or whatever, when basically they had to put Phil Spencer in the hot seat and say, Phil, give me one good, how do we save Xbox? And Phil, as I say this all the time, and it's worth repeating, is Phil basically went to Satya Nadella at Microsoft and said, well, you know what you guys do in like all the other areas of your company, like subscription services, and you basically dominate a certain section of the market with those subscription services. We're going to do that in gaming. I mean, I gotta admit, it's a fucking genius plan. Where if I was Microsoft CEO, I'd be like, well, is there anybody else doing that right now? Look around and be like, no, dude, Sony's still selling games. Nintendo definitely ain't doing it. So yeah, from Microsoft's perspective, it was a very smart and viable option. But now, we're starting to, as the years have went by, since Game Pass, was conceived and put out there, and it's been growing. Now you're really starting to see the long-term Game Pass plan begin to form, where it really is about domination. Just like for Sony. Sony won, man. And this is where I will say, I feel like Sony kind of got kicked in the balls a little bit here. And that's probably why they're so pissed off about this, because Sony's not stupid. They understand that things can change very quickly. But Sony worked and they competed for decades to be dominant in the traditional gaming space, right? Keyword being traditional. And they won. They kicked the shit out of Microsoft. Nintendo screwed up with the Wii U and had to go basically do their own thing. And Sony, I'm not saying Xbox wasn't competition to Sony, because they were, even if they weren't very good competition. They were still competition. But I think the last thing Sony expected Microsoft to do was to basically say, you know what, Sony, we're done playing this game. You're right. You won. You're the king of the hill. You got all the market share. You dominated. We're going to do something that we know you can't do and you won't do. And that's why I feel like Sony, they feel like they got kicked in the balls, because Microsoft called it. You're right. Sony can't do it, and they won't do it, and they're not doing it. And that's when Microsoft realized that, that's when they went in for the kill. And that's why but Bethesda, ZeniMax want to sell? Come on in. Yeah, we'll spend that money. Activision Blizzard wants to sell? Yo! Bet you Phil Spencer's eyes lit up that day. Nothing will secure Game Pass's future faster than Call of Duty will. Sony knows it. Microsoft knows it. And you know what? I will say that there was no bigger flex from Microsoft. Like, I'm talking like you want to talk like a big fuck you to Sony. The biggest flex that I've seen so far from Microsoft, that I don't think a lot of people picked up on, but it's pretty nasty, is how they made it public to Sony, or not to Sony, but like Sony basically talked about it, but it was made public with a bunch of redactions. And those redactions are important because those redactions are very likely numbers that we cannot see, that if we saw those numbers and we did the math, we'd probably come to the same conclusion that Sony has, where it's like, this is not viable. The biggest flex I've seen from Microsoft so far is how they basically were like, we just want to let everybody know that we were going to let Sony release Call of Duty onto PlayStation Plus day and date. And this is a smart thing for Microsoft to reveal. Sony tried to fight this. And you know why? Sony came out recently and they specifically said, just so you know, Microsoft was the one who requested all the redactions in these documents, and we can't do anything about that. And when you read those documents, you begin to see that these documents pertain to the Call of Duty deal that Microsoft offered them, and specifically letting them have it on PlayStation Plus. Sony did say it themselves. Again, they couldn't reveal the number. They would get in trouble, a lot of trouble. Sony said themselves that yes, the deal may seem good on the surface, but it's actually not, because Microsoft wants us to pay a licensing fee. Keep in mind, Microsoft will own Call of Duty. That meaning they don't have to pay shit to put it into Game Pass. They own it. They get to put it in the Game Pass. Sony, you're paying. How much are you paying? Notice how Microsoft won't reveal how much Sony would have to pay. And I understand that. I see somebody in the chat. It's a good thing to bring up. Well, who cares? It's Sony's money. And you're right. I'm not against that. Like, I don't care about Sony's money, but I do to the extent where if Sony comes out and says, we literally couldn't afford that, like, that would sink, that would be unsustainable and ridiculous. Like, we couldn't pay that. That's where I really begin to question what see, this is where it's not, I don't question, but it really does make me see Microsoft in a much clearer light. Where, like, dude, that is a hard flex on Sony, you know? Where imagine you go to your competitor who is dominating you, saying, hey, yeah, we'll give you Call of Duty for 10 years. You know what? We'll even let you put it on PlayStation Plus. We know that you don't want to embrace this new future and this model that we've created that will take over the future. We know you're fighting this, but you know what? We need this to go through, and we want you to be happy, Sony. So there you go. And Sony probably takes a look at the paper. They see the percentage or how much they would have to pay each year to get Call of Duty into PlayStation Plus. Keep in mind, Microsoft, as well as Sony, would be losing a lot of money. A lot of money that would normally be made off of PlayStation players if Sony agreed to that. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that Sony automatically doesn't want to lose the full price sales they're going to get from Call of Duty on PlayStation. So that's reason number one, greed, obviously, why they don't want to put it onto PlayStation Plus if they don't have to. But if Sony decides that, you know what, this might be the only option, and maybe they can make it work for them, where it's like, see, we're cool too. We agreed to put Call of Duty on PS Plus. I mean, that's like a big PR win for Sony. But, you know, Sony would be losing way more money than Microsoft in that case, because not only does Sony lose potential full price sales on their platform, they also have to pay a massive licensing fee. You know what I mean? Like and so that's like that's a hard slap to the face, in my opinion, from Microsoft. And, you know, I will say that they probably felt pretty good being able to, maybe not feeling good because they want Sony to sign that contract. But that's like that's one of those situations where, from a public perception point of view, you can see how Sony looks like shit. Like, are you kidding me, Sony? They're letting you put this game on PlayStation Plus day and date, just like Game Pass. That would be great for us. That would be great for everybody. But what people don't realize is that would be horrible for Sony. Like, that would be extremely horrible for Sony. And again, I'm not saying you have to care about Sony's bottom line, but in the same way that I know that Sony literally cannot afford to sustain a Game Pass model and put their exclusives day and date into PlayStation Plus, they would not be able to, in the long run, afford to pay for a game on the size that Call of Duty is. They would simply not be able to afford to pay for that either. So it really, I mean, this is truly like Microsoft grabbing, Sony by the balls, and they can't do anything, man. Like, the only thing Sony can do is stay quiet, hope that it just, the bad PR and the bad news wave just passes, and hope for Microsoft to come out and say stuff like this, in my opinion. Hicksock, you're saying, agreed, MBG, even a Killzone collection wouldn't do it. Yeah, dude, I think people, I know a lot of PlayStation fans love the classic Sony shooters like Killzone, Resistance, SOCOM, and I agree. I would love to see these games make a comeback. I really would, especially SOCOM. People have really, I hope Sony's making a SOCOM, because there's definitely a market for that type of game that's hungry for a comeback. And, I hope Sony's working on that. I feel like they're not, unfortunately, but that would be a big win for them. But I think people also need to understand that these games have never even gotten, they have not even gotten remotely close to something like Call of Duty. I mean, again, even a powerhouse FPS like Halo. I mean, even with the top Halo games, right? Like I still don't know that would necessarily be on the same level as Call of Duty. And I don't like talking about Call of Duty this way because I'll be honest, I do not get it anymore. I used to play Call of Duty all the time. I don't understand. I don't get it. You know what I mean? I do not understand the ultimate appeal of Call of Duty. I guess maybe it's just they've successfully brought on a whole new generation of players, which is if they manage to do that, if they manage to bring on a whole new generation of players, then that should give you an idea of like just the insane brand power of Call of Duty. But I just, even as somebody who wants Sony to bring their own heat, right? Like I want Sony, bring the heat, man. Let's see what you got. Compete. Try to compete at the very least, right? Even I know that no matter what they do, no matter how successful their game is, I mean, you know, we look at a game like Apex Legends. Believe me when I tell you, EA had no idea just how successful Apex Legends was going to be. And that was lightning in a bottle. Every massively successful live service multiplayer game you see is lightning in a bottle. And I promise you, most of these developers who are working on these games, they do not truly believe, at least I would assume most of them, they do not sit there and truly believe this is going to be the next so-and-so. They hope it can be. They want it to be. They want to have faith, but they know it takes luck. They know it takes something very special, very unique, and that is why Sony has 12, count them, 12 live service games in development. Not because Sony thinks all 12 of those live service games are going to be mega hits and succeed and be ultra brand names. No, because they know how difficult and rare it is. And if they go for 12, that gives them a higher chance that maybe, just maybe one of them, 1 out of 12, a 1 out of 12 chance, right? That maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll catch fire. It'll be lightning in the bottle. Saying MBG needs to upgrade his RAM. Is the stream okay? Is there anything wrong with it? Yeah, I see somebody in the chat saying I don't think SOCOM would be as big as people think if it came back. I mean, that's the reality. I gotta admit, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be. You know, like there is such a thing as the vocal minority. You guys are saying the stream's good? All right. And that's the thing is like, you see a lot of people calling for this game and that game and Sony bring this back, Sony bring that back, just like you see with Microsoft as well. And the reality is like these games are not, it's not that they can't be successful, but it's that by today's standards, that's the important thing to understand. By 2023 standards of what is a success and what's not, most of these games, unfortunately, would not be a success. And when it comes to the IP that Sony wants to bring back, rather than creating new IP, they have to be very careful about what they choose. Mark Loven, you're saying if Microsoft took over Call of Duty, I really believe it would go down the drain and will no longer be what it is. Rest in peace, Conquer. Well, I'm not so sure about that. We'll a really pivotal moment for Call of Duty, if this deal goes through, we're going to see like how many layoffs there will potentially be, what restructuring might happen, reorganization. And that will give us a really good idea of like, okay, is this going to be like a Bethesda situation where pretty much Microsoft absorbs Bethesda and they just like are like, okay, you do what you do. We own you. And that's, but that's about it. We're just going to put your games in Game Pass, but you do you make your games, right? We'll see about that. I get the feeling that because Activision Blizzard is much bigger than Bethesda, that Microsoft is basically going to absorb them and say, you guys just do what you do. And I do think that if Call of Duty falls eventually, like if you say it will, if it goes down the drain, it will be the fault of Activision. All I want to say real quick, this is something we have to consider. Somebody said earlier, well, what about the fact that these publishers, they want to sell. They want to be purchased, right? And you're right. And that's why I said earlier, you have to ask yourself, Why? Why do they want to be purchased? I mean, I know Call of Duty is very successful, but Activision Blizzard as a whole, I don't know, man. I don't know. They seem like right before Microsoft swooped in, they were in a pretty dire situation. You got to ask yourself why they want to be bought up so bad. I will tell you, I do think that a lot of the executives at Activision are kind of shocked to themselves that Call of Duty has remained as relevant for as long. It's like 20 straight years, dude. And it had some downs. It did. Call of Duty Ghosts. There was the whole like advanced warfare thing, you know? And I think that those were like years where it's like, yo, what the hell's going on? And I do want to remind people, really let this one marinate for a moment. Okay? This isn't me trying to downplay Call of Duty because I'm not. I understand. Like, it's still an absolute powerhouse for sure. But just to play devil's advocate here, has nobody like taken a step back and realized that the new, like the Call of Duties we've been getting since 2020 are literal, no, not 2020, since 2019. So for like four years, going on 4 years now, almost a quarter of a decade it'll be, are literal remakes of previous Call of Duties. We have Modern Warfare 2 is what we have. And apparently this year's Call of Duty, they're going to position as a full game, and it's going to be basically a massive DLC for Modern Warfare 2 too. Yeah, Modern Warfare 2 Part 2 coming soon. Thank you. I love that. That there you go. That's what we're getting. This is what's going on in the minds of the people who are running Call of Duty right now. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it almost sounds like they're running out of ideas. Because what people don't understand is, for as big and successful as Call of Duty is, why do you think when a game like Call of Duty Advanced Warfare comes out and it sells like 10 million or like 8 million copies more than like every other game, it's still considered a failure? Why do you think that is? Why do you think it is that the worst game that Call of Duty's put out in the eyes of a lot of people in the past 2 decades is Call of Duty Ghosts? That game sold more than 99% of games ever have a chance of selling, and it's considered a fucking failure. Why do you think this is? See, this is what happens when things balloon up too big and when everything hinges on one thing. On one thing. And I look forward, I think about, okay, so this year we're getting Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 Part 2. Okay. Probably, I'll tell you now, that'll be interesting. I'm curious I want to know, how well is that going to be received? Right? You have an entire fan base and player base that just bought Modern Warfare 2. And of course they're going to buy it. It's Modern Warfare 2. Again, right? Like, it's Modern Warfare 2. Who's not going to buy it? But now Activision is taking a step further where they ran out of ideas. They did not have a Call of Duty game ready for 2023. And we were originally told that 2023 was going to be the first year where Activision breaks their cycle. Okay? We were told this was going to be the first year they break their cycle, and they're just going to release a big premium DLC, which presumably will not be a $60 or $70 game. Maybe it'll be $30, maybe $40, whatever, but it'll be DLC. Therefore, by positioning it as an expansion and a DLC, it's not going to do anywhere near as well as a new mainline Call of Duty game. But no, Activision got greedy, as they always do, and they said, maybe we can just sell it as a full game. Maybe we could just do that. It'll just be Modern Warfare 2 Part 2, whatever, you know what I mean? Full game. I'm really interested. I'm interested to hear how well that sells, because I'll tell you right now, as somebody who's been following Call of Duty for a long time, I've never seen that shit. I understand Call of Duty recycles. You look at a game like Call of Duty Advanced Warfare up against Call of Duty Black Ops 3, up against Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. Yes, they're all extremely similar, futuristic, jetpack, wall running, the whole thing, but they're all very distinct. Now we're about to see Activision try to pull something they've never pulled before, and I promise you the only reason they're doing this is because of this deal. Because I was thinking, like, what would change their minds? What would make Activision suddenly go, we have to sell this as a premium DLC. We don't have a game this year. To suddenly, you know what? Maybe we can sell it as a game. Oh, that's right. A giant mega multi-trillion-dollar corporation basically looking to buy you up. And if it doesn't go through, they pay you $3 billion. I mean, if I was Activision Blizzard, I'd say, well, yeah, fuck it. Sell that shit as a brand new game. Scummy. It sucks. It's greedy. But then you look beyond that, 2024. That's going to be Treyarch's next game. Now, I will admit, I've fallen off of Call of Duty, but Treyarch was always my favorite. And I will admit, I probably will buy their game depending on what it is. It depends. Like, I'm a sucker for the Black Ops series. But even as a big fan, I played Black Ops Cold War, and I'm like, dude, this is just Black Ops, like remake, which is fine. Like, I'm a sucker for that, but that's what it is. There's nothing new, nothing innovative, nothing interesting. But I like the Black Ops characters. I like that, whole 80s thing. So I'm looking at 2024, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be Treyarch's next game. I think that'll be fine. I think that'll be perfectly fine, right? Because it's Treyarch. They're going to use the Black Ops name. It'll be fine. My question is, beyond 2024, what does Call of Duty begin to look like? Because then we're going to be moving on to presumably Modern Warfare 3 in 2025. And I have to, and that's the thing. You look at the original Modern Warfare series. When did things start to go downhill for the original Modern Warfare series? It was at around Modern Warfare 3 time. Modern Warfare 3, to a lot of people, is still pretty good, but that's when you could tell, like, they ran out of ideas for the Modern Warfare franchise. They're like, we got to move on to something else next. And I think after Modern Warfare 3, it did turn into Ghosts, And I also have to think, so basically what I'm trying to say here, to summarize, what is Activision going to do? Whether they're purchased by Microsoft or not. Because assuming that Microsoft purchases Activision Blizzard, they remain as an independent company, basically. Like, they're owned by Microsoft, but they're just doing their own thing. What do they do when you can't keep doing Modern Warfare? Because you already did that. You know what I mean? Like, you did Modern Warfare 1 through 3, and then you did it again. What now? What about Black Ops? What happens when like the Black Ops name, like, you can't just keep using it? Because I'm telling you, every single time Activision has released a Call of Duty that doesn't feature the Modern Warfare name or the Black Ops name, those games do not sell nearly as well. And Activision shareholders and Activision themselves are not happy about it. Now, maybe that'll change underneath Microsoft. Maybe that'll change underneath Microsoft. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe Microsoft will say, we don't care about selling, as many copies. Maybe Game Pass will. I don't want to see. I don't want to say that Game Pass will save Call of Duty in the end when they run out of gas and ideas. But what I do think is that Game Pass will basically be the perfect home for Call of Duty in the long run. Because I do think the day of reckoning, like, whatever, it's getting all dramatic up in here. But I do think the day of reckoning for a franchise like Call of Duty is coming. I do. Like, I really do think that it has avoided a decline for a long time. And I feel like they've only just barely avoided it. And I think, underneath Microsoft, they'll basically be like, well, it's okay if it stagnates. It's okay if it's stale because Game Pass. So I think if anything, maybe Call of Duty, the perfect home for it ultimately will be Game Pass. Because I'm somebody who was a Call of Duty fan, and even I'm like dude, I can't keep buying this shit every year, man. Even I feel that. Like I'm all about paying full price for games and owning them, but even I'm like, this is crazy. It's too much. Saying Spider-Man 2 just leaked. Check Reddit. I'll check it in a minute. We'll see if it's true. Anyway, I gotta. So here's what's gonna happen now. I'm still going to talk, but I really got to start to get through these super chats. I've been letting you guys linger way too long. I apologize for that. My name is Mud. You're saying Sony wouldn't sign a lifetime deal with Microsoft. I don't know about that one. I will say this to that. If Microsoft changes their tune and Microsoft, let's just say like next month comes out and is like, we will offer Sony and every other company a 20-year deal. At that point, I will turn to Sony and be like, you are out of your fucking minds if you don't sign that deal. Like, I would truly be like, at that point, I would also be clowning on Sony because that's insane. A 20-year deal is like unheard of. But if Microsoft just said screw it and they're serious about never taking it off and they actually offered 20 years, I'd be like, dude, Sony. Sony I think would ruin their reputation truly if they didn't sign that. Saying you can't do 20 years, that's ridiculous. I mean, but my question to that is if you don't plan on ever taking Call of Duty off, why is it ridiculous? You see what I mean? Take the 10. Yeah. Maybe in the end, that's what Sony will do, man. Maybe in the end, that is what they will do. Thank you for the $5 super chat, Fess. Rari2XX, you're saying Xbox does sound hypocritical with this. It's a fact. Fess, you're saying, hey, MBG, I think you meant to say you haven't heard the argument about Microsoft getting future Sony dev kits before generation begins. They could boost their own specs before the next gen of consoles come out. Yeah, but at the same time, like, I feel like that already exists to a degree, I have to imagine. I don't know. I mean, I'll be honest with you, man. Microsoft already did that with the Series X. Like, Microsoft already came out with the Series X and was like, this is more powerful than the PS5. And it, like, really, if you look at where we are now, it's like nearly the middle of 2023. I feel like people don't really care anymore. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's cool, but does that matter to anybody now? I don't think so. So thank you for that, Fess. My name is Mud. You're saying Starfield and Elder Scrolls are single player, which is why they are exclusive. Look at Sony's approach to putting their games on PC. It's similar. That's a good point. My name is Mud. I will admit I didn't consider that, and that is true. They are single player games, and that's definitely something that Microsoft needs. Yeah, I mean, I can't argue that. That I will admit that could be a reason why. That could be the reason why. Maybe they're like, dude, like we want to keep this everywhere because it's multiplayer. Yeah, that. The more I think about it, that logic does hold up. I admit. Dirty Drips, you're saying Escape from Tarkov will come to consoles in the near future and take over first-person shooters 100% new, fresh experience no FPS can offer. It's interesting that you mentioned Escape from Tarkov. I haven't played it. I've heard good things about it. There does seem to be this desire for like a new experience in the first-person shooter genre, something fresh, as you say. And if I'm not mistaken, Modern Warfare 2 actually tried to do their own take on Escape from Tarkov, and I think it flopped. I could be wrong, but I know that they were like making it free to play, and it's just I don't hear anybody talk about it. I forget what it was called. It had a name, but yeah, that's interesting to think. New Soul 9, you're saying MBG, you keep forgetting Sony has Bungie. They literally can get a rival having Bungie on their team, especially in the span of 10 years. That's true as well. Yeah, DMZ, I think. Yeah, that's what it's called. That is true, New Soul 9. And I don't want to discount that. the fact that Sony does have Bungie is something that I have to admit, I am surprised that Microsoft hasn't used that argument yet. You know what I mean? I think it's kind of strange that like Microsoft hasn't mentioned that, hey, you have like Bungie and you can use that. And that's true. And I don't know, man. Apparently, I will say the interesting thing about Bungie is we don't know what they're working on, but we know that they're working on kind of a lot. They're working on a lot. So I get this feeling that like they could end up revealing a couple things that Bungie's working on, and suddenly it may make Sony's argument potentially. Because I mean, let's face it, Bungie is huge. I mean, I don't know if Destiny is as up there with Call of Duty, but I don't know. Do we consider Destiny a Call of Duty competitor? It's hard for me to say. I don't follow it enough to know, but I know it's still really big. So I know that. Saying a big no. Well, again, I don't follow Destiny too closely, so I can't really say. Yeah, they are very different games. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe we should see what would a modern military shooter look like underneath Bungie. That would be interesting. All right, let me see. Fabrice, you're saying, I'm sorry, but Epic Games, Nvidia, Nintendo, and Steam are for this deal. Most of the gaming industry are happy with the deal. Microsoft is not alone. Well, you're right about that. And I do want to point this out. Again, this isn't me defending Sony. If anything, it's me maybe actually pointing out a flaw within PlayStation. I think if you look at the companies you just mentioned, Nvidia, Nintendo, Steam, you're right. Like they have a very different position, as well as many other publishers and game developers do from Sony. But the main difference between Sony and all of these companies and all of these other publishers and game developers is Sony specifically is the one who got in bed with Activision and Call of Duty for many, many years. And they have profited greatly off of that. And it's been going on for so long that they clearly rely on it to a certain extent now. And that's why, like, I think, again, I do think that is Sony's fault. You know, they made the decision to get in bed with a third-party publisher that at the end of the day, you know, nobody said that they might not be bought up or that, you know, that they can't be bought up. I just don't think Sony expected it. But I will say that I think that is a difference that again, I'm not saying you have to say it's right, but in just trying to understand, like, why is Sony being so difficult with this while every other company is just okay with it? Because, I mean, let's face it, Nintendo is probably like, wait, what? We could get Call of Duty now? You know, I think that's what's funny. That's the most funny thing. But, you know, Steam, they're not worried because they know Microsoft is PC. You know what I mean? Nvidia, I'll be honest. Nvidia, Epic Games is PC as well, but Nvidia, Epic, you know, all the companies you just listed are not, in my opinion, I mean, maybe the closest, could be like Epic, Nvidia. It is tough. I will say that does work against Sony, and I will say that if there's anything that, in my opinion, does make it clear to me that this isn't just about Sony losing Call of Duty, it really is about maintaining that profit and getting that easy money that they get every year guaranteed and not having that stripped from them. It is the fact that, yeah, a lot of these companies who also make money off Call of Duty, just not as much, they're fine with it. So, yeah, I agree with that as well. It's something that really does stack up pretty heavily against Sony. Subtext, you're saying not a lawyer, but these statements seem like Microsoft responding to hypothetical challenges. CMA says, what if you pulled Call of Duty after 10 years? Microsoft says, we won't, but 10 years is good enough for Sony to build an alt. Yeah, that's a good call out as well, Subtext. I take it as that as well. I do think that Microsoft is putting this out here because they do anticipate, specifically with the CMA, that they are going to get pushback, more so than they would get with maybe other regulators. It still makes me laugh that the FTC is just straight up like, we're suing you. Like, it's still, I'm I mean, right now, so Microsoft is focused on the CMA, but I think out of all the regulators I'm most interested in, it really is the FTC, and that's not going to happen until a while from now because they're not going to court, I think, until like August or something. But that to me is going to be the most interesting because the FTC is like the only regulator that just straight up was like, "Oh hell no!" Like we are suing your ass for doing this, and I know a lot of people are calling it now. They're saying that the FTC is going to they're going to get destroyed in court. They're going to lose, but I don't. I think it's look, man. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that if the FTC is taking Microsoft to court, surely they have to have a leg to stand on that they believe could stop this. Maybe not though. That'd be a weird thing to do. I will say it would be very strange for the FTC to take Microsoft to court if they truly didn't have a leg to stand on. But I think you're right, Subtext. I think they're just preemptively putting this out here for, like you said, hypothetical challenges. Miguel, you're saying 10 isn't enough, so 15, 20? Explain the difference. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to figure out the tone at which you said this super chat, but it's what I said earlier. Like to me, if you're Microsoft and if you truly never plan to take Call of Duty off, like it really is, it's like this is always going to be everywhere. Then signing a 15 to 20 year deal. I mean, you're saying explain the difference. I don't know if the tone in that is like sarcastic, like please, like yeah, explain the difference. Like there's clearly a big difference. I mean, there is a big difference between 10 and 20 years for sure. But if you are going to keep something on a platform forever, then what is there to fear? Because let's face it, everybody would say that signing a 20-year deal or even proposing a 20-year deal would be asinine. Why would you ever do that? 20 years? Well, the only reason you wouldn't is if you're afraid something might change. And if you're afraid something might change, then you are validating the exact fear that Sony has. You see what I'm saying? So, but I do understand. I should clarify. I do understand. You're saying nobody offers a deal that long for something like this. I get that. But why should that? Maybe Microsoft could. Why not be the first? I mean, let's face it. No one has purchased a publisher like Activision. Right? I mean, that's a first. No one has ever bought a publisher nearly as big. This is like by far and away the biggest thing this is unprecedented. Exactly. Why do we have to use precedent? This case is unprecedented. That's perfectly put. So if we have an unprecedented case, then maybe Microsoft should be willing to offer an unprecedented deal. Sounds fair to me. I'm sure Sony would like that. But I will say this too. I will say this. If I were Microsoft, this is assuming that they don't actually want to pull Call of Duty. If I were Microsoft, I would genuinely be thinking like maybe we should just take Sony out right now and offer a 20-year deal. Because I'll tell you right now, like the only one, Sony at that point would be the only one in the room. If Microsoft was like, you know what, fuck it, here's a 20-year deal. Yes, it's insane, we're doing it. Sony would look so unbelievably bad if they denied that. They would be over for, in my opinion, it would be over for Sony at that point, where it's like, dude, man, Microsoft just basically, they have your number. So, well, that's true. That's true. You're saying in the eyes of a lot of people, they already do look bad. Yeah, but somehow this, I don't know, man. Like the FTC would look bad as well. I think that would be a power move on Microsoft's part. Because I'll tell you right now, if Microsoft if they did come out and they're like, you know what, fine, Sony, 20 years. At that point, I'd be like, well, damn, you've convinced me that you're never taking. I would truly be convinced you never plan to take. Now I believe you. Turns out Sony was paranoid. I would believe you. at that point. Because, I mean, 20 years at that point, who the hell knows what the world looks like? It's not just about the number of years, though. MBG, it's hard to beat the FTC. Let me take a drink here. Give me a second, guys. My voice is starting to go. By the way, guys, can you hit that like button for me? Can we make it to 500 likes? That'd be fantastic. I'd really appreciate that. The real, you're saying, why is it when Sony kept many games off of Xbox, y'all laughed about it? Now, since the tables turned, Sony wants to play victim. It's funny to me, honestly. Well, that's where I do try to separate myself here, man. I mean, look, I understand Sony's position, and I understand why they are so upset with this and why they're fighting against it. But I can admit that Sony, to a degree, had it coming. But I think we have to at least agree upon this. While Sony did kind of have it coming, like as in someone's going to come around and give them a dose of their own medicine, I think that it's like, it would, like, to me, this is going to sound like a really, all right. So this analogy is basically, I feel like Sony basically, kicked Microsoft's ribs while they were down a little bit. They kicked Microsoft's ribs while they were down a little bit. And, Sony basically was like, we're good, bro. And I think what we're witnessing now is basically Microsoft training for years on steroids and getting a pair of brass knuckles and basically going up to Sony and just get, maybe not brass knuckles, because I feel like you could definitely kill somebody with brass knuckles. Maybe like, basically just giving them a good old, we're going to break your bones. You know what I mean? Maybe that analogy wasn't as good as I thought it would be, but I'm just basically saying that, yeah, Sony had it coming, but it's like, at what point is this like, oh, geez, man, all right. Like, I feel like this is the equivalent of Microsoft got their hit in on Sony, and Sony got knocked out, and then Microsoft is like going up to knocked out Sony and still hitting them on the head while they're knocked out, where it's like, bro, back off. You got him. That's my analogy for basically, you know what I mean? I don't know. It's like false equivalence. It's difficult to compare. For those who I completely lost, for those who are not good with analogies, or maybe I'm bad with analogies. Too much MMA you're watching, MBG. Yeah, I mean, look, basically what it boils down to is it's very difficult to compare Sony signing some exclusivity deals over the years and over the generations with Microsoft buying a publisher like Activision Blizzard. It really, they are true. I know people don't want to accept it because a lot of people do feel like, well, Sony, you keep your games off Xbox. You pay to keep certain games off Xbox. I know people don't want to accept it, but they really are different things, simply in the power that Microsoft wields. And that's the important thing to understand. Some people might say, well, dude, if Sony's intention is to keep specific games off of Microsoft, then this is Microsoft doing the same thing. Yes, but the biggest difference is that Sony only has so much power to do that. You know what I mean? Sony has to pay a certain amount of money with a publisher that is willing to strike that deal with them. And 9 times out of 10, they're timed deals, as in they will eventually make their way to other platforms. It's Sony paying basically for an advantage for a little while. This is not Microsoft paying for an advantage. This is not Microsoft paying for timed exclusives. This is Microsoft paying to own and to have power. Like that's what it is. Like this is Microsoft paying for power. And that's power that Sony can't afford to pay for. Hence why Microsoft is doing it. So, I'm not saying Sony doesn't, like, I'll give you a good example. Let's say that Microsoft tried to buy Activision and never bought Bethesda. If Microsoft paid to make Starfield like a permanent exclusive, just Starfield, I'd say, yeah, that's pretty fair. Like Sony had that one coming. Now Microsoft's giving them a dose of their own medicine. But that's not what this is. You know what I mean? It's two different things. Subtext, member for 7 months, you're saying, I think these headlines are part of a full vetting process where every possibility is explored and requires answers. Still, Microsoft def wants Call of Duty exclusive. Yeah, you're probably correct about that. One thing I know for sure is we're still going to get some really strange things. We're going to get some really strange things that are going to come out from both Sony and Microsoft before this is over. And this, I think, will be far from the strangest. But I do support what I said in that I simply don't think Microsoft should be the company or the platform holder or the publisher to turn to Sony and say, hey, 10 years is more than enough time for you to figure it out. Like, I feel like that's just like, dude, it wasn't enough time for you, Microsoft? Because you had like 20 years and you still couldn't figure it out. You see what I'm saying? Big Nabs, you're saying fanboys should view Microsoft's track record with concern. That's another thing that bothers me, man. I try not to talk too much about this because people don't like to hear it because honestly, a lot of people don't care. And a lot of people say like, dude, you're a PlayStation man. Well, you're a PlayStation man. You're a PlayStation guy. Just stay in your lane, man. You know, that's how a lot of people treat me. And I get that. And I don't want to make it sound like it shouldn't be like that. It should be. I mean, I'm not out here being like, I can't wait to play Starfield. But what I can say is that, you know, a great example I can give you is let me look at Final Fantasy 16 and let me look at Spider-Man 2. All right. I have a certain level of excitement for Final Fantasy 16, and I will admit the fact that Sony went out of their way to pay for exclusivity for Final Fantasy 16 makes me take a closer look at it. Like, I like a lot of the games that Sony makes, and assuming that Sony wants to get similar games on their platform, suddenly I'm like, okay, I'm paying closer attention. But I want it to be known that I'm not out here hyping up Final Fantasy 16 to a degree in which I can honestly say that. You know what I mean? Like, I can honestly tell you that Final Fantasy 16 is on my radar more so because Sony has aligned themselves with it. Because I care about Sony and I care about their studios. And therefore, I'm going to pay closer attention to any other studio they align themselves with. And I can admit that. In fact, look, I told you guys the reason why I played Final Fantasy VII Remake is because you guys kept telling me, like, you got to play this game, bro. And I was not really ever that interested in Final Fantasy. I played Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I loved it. And suddenly that's, between the fact that my first Final Fantasy experience was great, and Final Fantasy 16 is going to be a PS5 exclusive, and I happen to cover PlayStation, so hey, this is a match made in heaven, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I'm not sitting here and pretending that suddenly, holy shit, man, Sony is going to fucking dominate. They got Final Fantasy 16 coming. They're going to, this is it, man. It's more like that was a strategic move that will benefit PlayStation, sell a lot of PS5s, and I'm going to play it. And what I've seen of it looks pretty good so far. There could be a chance I play Final Fantasy 16 and suddenly it's like, this isn't as good as I thought it would be, or maybe this really isn't for me. It's a possibility. The reason why I'm mentioning all this is because, dude, like, that's not, I'm trying to say Final Fantasy 16 is not why I am here. PlayStation Studios is why I am here. PlayStation first party IP is why I am here. And Final Fantasy 16 is just the cherry on top, in my opinion. And this is why the main argument I have attempted to make time and time again that people do not want to hear, or at least some people don't want to hear, is that it is very difficult for me to rah-rah, cheer on what Microsoft's doing, because all I'm seeing them doing is buying video games to put their brand on. That's not me saying, hey, that's wrong. That's not me saying Sony doesn't do that. No, it's not wrong. And Sony does do that too. My question is, where the fuck are your games? Your games. Xbox games. Not Starfield, not a Bethesda game, not Redfall. Where's Xbox and their games? It turns out they don't know. Well, you got Forza? Yeah, you do. You fucking got Forza. That's great. What about Halo? What about Gears? Are people not tired of it yet? I think they are. What else? I mean, really, what else? What didn't you buy? I'm not trying to be a dick about it, but it just pisses me off that people just completely skirt around this reality. Like, this is the reality. The reality is Microsoft has paid and bought all of their games. And maybe, just maybe, at some point, they might get a good game. I will even go as far to say, because I know what this is going to turn into, and I will take it this far. Spider-Man 2. Yes, that's Insomniac. Yes, Sony bought Insomniac in 2019. So with that in mind, they're not that old of a PlayStation studio. So if you want to take it that far, then I will even take it as far to say that fine. Maybe even Spider-Man 2 isn't necessarily a Sony game, if we got to take it that far. I know that's pretty extreme, but I'm just saying that, like, I'm tired, man. Like, I'm tired of people hyping up Xbox when there's nothing to hype. The only thing people can hype up about Xbox is the shit they're buying and the deals they're offering. And that's fine. That's reason enough for a consumer to get hype. But if you're talking about being an enthusiast and caring about caring about something more than that in the gaming industry, something that's just beyond saving as much money as you can, you have to ask the question, where are Xbox's games? Microsoft didn't develop Hi-Fi Rush. Microsoft didn't develop The Outer Worlds. Microsoft didn't develop Starfield. Microsoft didn't develop, what's that game called? It's the I don't know why it's eluding me. It's the game by I can't even remember the name of the damn studio. Somebody help me out. I'm sure so. It's like completely eluding me. It's right on the tip of my tongue. It's one of the smaller games. It's not Hi-Fi Rush. Psychonauts. Thank you. Yes, I knew somebody was going to get it. Psychonauts 2. Microsoft didn't develop that. Microsoft didn't develop Pentiment. I mean, these developers have said, like, oh, having Microsoft own us has given us more of a cushion, and that's great. And hopefully that results in better games ultimately. But I'm just sick and tired of everyone skirting around the actual core of this argument. And in my opinion, the core of this argument is you have two platform holders, two video game publishers that were competing, building studios, buying studios in their infancy, creating studios from the ground up to support their platform. And it just so happens one did it a hell of a lot better than the other. And that's the nature of these things. There's a winner and there's a loser. But if this is, I guess what I'm trying to say, if this is the only way Microsoft wins, I just simply can't get behind it because that sucks, dude. I'll tell you right now, I know we talk about, you know, so would Sony end up buying a full blown uh publisher? Sony going to buy a full blown publisher in response to this? Dude, I don't give a shit, man. I don't care because they're not Sony games. They're not PlayStation Studio games. They can slap the PlayStation Studio logo on it all they want. They're not. To me, what makes PlayStation Studios unique and good and like worthwhile is the fact that Sony has taken the time necessary to cultivate their studios from their infancy and grow them over the course of many, many years. Granted, a studio like Insomniac does stand out a little bit simply because they put out Spider-Man and it was such a success. Sony was like, we got to lock these guys down. So I get it. I don't fault Microsoft for buying a studio like Ninja Theory or buying a studio like Undead Labs. They see the potential there, and that's fine. You could argue they're going to cultivate these studios, and we will see. We will see how they cultivate these studios. But I am fucking sick and tired of this charade, man, where it's like, oh man, Starfield looks so great. Like, yeah, it does. And Xbox had fucking jack all to do with it. You know? So it's hard for me to give Xbox credit. That's the point, dude. People are like, what am I going to give? Like, I'm not going to give Sony credit for Final Fantasy 16. Sony didn't develop Final Fantasy 16. They struck a deal. They said, we'll help market it. We'll help. I mean, I think the most Sony did was they'll say, here's how you can better optimize for the PS5. That's in Sony's best interest. It's just, I find it fucking comical that, like, you know, when we get that, what, in January, we got that Xbox, saying, come on, MVG, you're a nice guy, but this is a cry-a-thon. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm just, whatever, it's cathartic for me. Look, I'm just saying, like, even in January, when we got that Xbox show, the Xbox Direct or whatever, like, like the only game that I can think of that was actually like from an Xbox studio that wasn't just straight up bought when they were already massive was Forza. You're saying who cares? You know what? That's the fucking problem. People should care. People should. I'm not saying they have to, but maybe they should, because this is why, man. Like, people cry and they bitch and they moan all the time, just like I am right now, but about other things, about, man, what's happening to this industry? What the fuck do you mean what's happening? Look at the shit that you're just okay with. You're just okay with it. Like, you're letting people come out and say, this is good. And I have to sit back and ask, like, but fucking, is it really? Like, is it actually good? I mean, really, though, is it good? And then that's when we get into the whole, well, everything's subjective. And that's true. That's true. And look, I guess all I'm trying to say, because I know I'm going off the fucking deep end now, all I'm trying to say is that when I look at how things can be, because I see that there is a video game publisher they're doing it, like they're executing on it. And they're doing a damn good job. They're not perfect, but they're doing really good. I guess I just find myself kind of bewildered that there aren't more video game publishers, and especially like somebody like Xbox, where it's like, why aren't you guys taking notes? I'm not saying copy, but I'm saying, like, take some fucking notes here. And I feel like, it's just a shame to me. It's a shame to me that a publisher like Microsoft decided, we're not taking notes. We're buying publishers. And I don't care what anybody says at this point, man. Like, how can you get excited about that? How can you get excited about industry consolidation? It's fucking bizarre. No, I'm not saying that I'd rather see, I'd rather see a Chinese entity come, yes, an entity, big corporate entity come in and scoop up a publisher. I don't want to see that, but that doesn't mean I'm going to root for Microsoft to do it instead. Like, how about we just let studios remain independent? And you know what this ultimately comes down to? And I'm going to, now I'm going to fucking nip it in the bud, and then I'm going to read the rest of these super chats. But this is what it all comes down to. This is what it all comes down to. And people probably don't know it, or they don't want to know it, or they don't care to know it. The reason why I keep saying over the course of this, not podcast, but the stream, why is it, what puts these companies in such bad positions? Why do these companies get so fucking desperate to be purchased, to be bought by a company that is pretty much, it's impossible for them to go out of business? Why? Because they fuck up. Well, why do they keep fucking up? Greed is why. Greed. Chasing trends. So when you are fucking advocating for a publisher to be purchased, and if your defense behind that is, well, they want to be purchased. Yeah, because they suck. They fucking suck. And they chase trends. And when it doesn't work out, well, what are they going to say to their shareholders? Well, we promised you we were going to be able to do this and do that. This is what bothers me so much about this shit, man. Like, people don't ever go to the source. They don't chase it down far enough. They just think, well, I'll get a better deal. Like, yeah, maybe you do, but you have to fucking question, what was going wrong? I mean, why isn't it that people maybe take a second to be like, oh, look at that. A publisher like Bethesda. They did Fallout 76, and a lot of people were upset with that, and a lot of people were saying, well, they had to do that. Why did they have to do that? Why? Some people might say, well, hey, dude, look, they got Xbox support now. And I think people need to get a fucking reality check. And you think Microsoft isn't going to expect results from these publishers, from these studios? They are. And I'm just saying, these problems are not rectified by being purchased and shoved into a subscription model. Maybe temporarily they are, but you better believe Starfield has to land. It has to land in a big, big, big way. And the only way that's going to happen is not through people saying, well, I only paid $10 for it. It's going to happen by it being a good game. That's it. That's the only way. I don't know, man. Maybe I sound whiny, maybe I sound bitchy, but I'm just saying, man, I've been gaming for a long time, and I see some of the shit that's going on, and it's like, look, it gets really tiring. It gets really tiring, and it just... The reason why I said many times at this point that I don't know that I'm opposed to Sony losing Call of Duty is because Sony can say whatever they want. Sony can make it sound like, oh, we... Old man shouting at cloud gaming. Yeah, maybe. You're saying, but you can't control it, so why complain? I don't know. I guess maybe just because I know people are willing to listen, and I appreciate that, And it's I'm venting a little bit, but it's just because, I follow this shit so closely. And as I was about to say, I wait to see what will Sony do? What kind of Sony would we get? What kind of Sony would we get without Call of Duty if they can't rely on it? And I said it, I don't know if it was my last podcast, I think it was the one prior to that, where I basically said, I don't know that I'm opposed to Sony, seeing their profits drop a little bit. I don't know that I'm opposed to that. I don't know that I'm opposed to seeing Sony maybe drop down a rung or two and not breaking records in how much money they're making. I say this because it's not that I want PlayStation to sink or to fail or anything. If anything, it's just because I don't. It depends on what it is they're doing. For example, I love to see a game like God of War Ragnarok doing so well for Sony and making Sony a lot of money because it's simple. It makes Sony go, holy shit, like we're doing something right here. We're investing in these massive, awesome single player games where the quality bar is set super high, you know, and takes a long time, takes a lot of money, but we make good profit from it. Like that is what I like to see. What I don't like to see is Sony, out here basically being like, well, maybe a game like God of War wouldn't have existed without Call of Duty. Like, I don't want to hear that shit, because it's like, dude, why is it that we can only get good things by relying on the things that maybe aren't so great? Like the things that are like, well, there's a lot of issues with the industry, and I guess all I'm trying to say is I don't know that subscription services are going to be the answer or the solution to many of these problems. And in fact, I fear that just as free-to-play games, and I know Sony's going to have their own free-to-play games, but let's face it, free-to-play games over the years have been plagued by many problems that only really cropped up, when it really became about we need to get as many people in the door as possible. There's going to be problems. That's all I'm trying to say. Like, there's going to be problems, and I know I'm all over the place with my rant here. I know that, and I'm almost done. I promise. I'm almost done. But I just feel like there are many problems right now in the gaming industry. There are things that are being facilitated to, in my opinion, further either exacerbate those problems or bring in further problems. And in my opinion, what Sony's doing with their studios in particular, granted, we have not seen their live service games, so I'm going to add that caveat. We have to see how they handle that. That's where things could go wrong. In my opinion, the way that Sony has been handling their studios is something that a lot of the industry really should be looking at, taking notes and thinking like, again, not copy, but like there's something being done here that if we try to replicate, maybe we can facilitate that type of success as well. And this can be good. But then again, we're kind of seeing the opposite, aren't we? Sony instead is like, hey, we're going to make live service games. So I don't know. I've gotten to that point in my rant where I'm just beginning to, I'm going so off the rails. I don't even know what the hell point I'm trying to make anymore. Oh, here we go. Here we can change the topic here. I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to change this topic. MBG needs to play some dope games. I love that. Capono. That's Capono's answer. Like, damn, MBG's out here ranting hard. He just needs to play some dope games. Well, you know what, dude? I'm playing Resident Evil 4 Remake on Friday, and I'm excited to talk about that game, man. That game looks really good. I love Resident Evil 4, and I'm excited to see how they remade it. And yeah, Tony Todd. I don't know if this tweet was deleted or not. He's probably going to delete it. If it hasn't been already. Tony Todd, the voice actor for Venom, he tweeted out this was a little while ago, actually. It's a couple hours ago. Looks like September. Massive publicity coming in August. Commercials start dropping in August, so I'm told. Hold on to your ... and hold your breath. Going to be necessary. Bro, come on. We're all picking up what Tony Todd's putting down, right? We're all picking it up, right? He just confirmed it. Spider-Man September. Marketing push coming in August. Interesting. Very interesting. I gotta say, I don't think Tony Todd was supposed to say that, but it's not surprising. You know what is surprising a little bit to me? Do you know what his tweet confirms? He says, massive publicity coming in August. Commercials start dropping in August. Sony's going to do it again. Sony's going to do exactly what they did with God of War, but with Spider-Man. Tony Todd about to be fired. Sony's not going to start marketing Spider-Man until like the end of July, going into August, about a month before the game comes out. I don't know if I like this, man. I don't know. A part of me likes it. A part of me doesn't. The content creator in me doesn't like that because I really wish Sony would drip feed a little bit more so I could have more stuff to talk about on a more frequent basis. Like, I would love to give you guys like actual updates on Spider-Man. You're saying so no showcase until around August? No, not necessarily, man. I mean, keep in mind, he's talking about massive publicity and commercials. Basically, to translate Tony Todd's tweet, what he's saying is he's being told the massive marketing push for Spider-Man is starting in August and it's coming in September. That's what he's saying. That doesn't mean that we can't get a gameplay demonstration or trailer at a showcase before August. Sony could do a state of play, next month or in May or June if they wanted. But that doesn't necessarily mean the marketing cycle kicks off. You get what I'm saying? So it just means that they want to establish something with Spider-Man, give the fans something, and then they'll go dark until about a month before. But I don't know, man. We could see a situation where Sony just gives us maybe like a story trailer at a showcase in like early June or something. And then, yeah, they have, you're right. They haven't even marketed Horizons DLC. Dude, I don't know, man. I really do begin to wonder if Sony's purposely marketing their games this way because of the ongoing situation. Because, dude, this is so strange to me. I just don't recall Sony ever marketing their games in such a, like, we're going to just wait till the last minute, basically. I don't recall them ever doing this. This could be their new plan on how they do it, but I don't know, man. It's so weird. It's so weird, But then again, God of War broke a record. So anyway, let me get through these super chats. Jerome, you're saying Microsoft will remember all that Sony is doing once the deal goes through. LOL, PlayStation will need to sleep with one eye open, and I'm here for it. News vids are fire. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's the thing, man, is if there's one thing that this entire situation between Sony and Microsoft guarantees is that there is not going to be any partnerships, any goodwill, anything like that. It'll be quite the opposite. Sony and Microsoft, if they didn't already have an axe to grind with one another, it's not going to be good. And I agree. I kind of am here for it because that means more fierce competition. Like, make no mistake, I don't necessarily know that Sony's going to buy a publisher, but there's no doubt that one of the reasons why I am excited about this deal to go through is because that will create a kind of ripple for Sony as well, where now Sony has to deal with that reality where it's like, there's nothing you can do. There's no more talking. It's over. Like, they got Activision. What do you do now? And that to me is exciting because they're going to have to do something, right? Like, that's the whole thing. If Sony's making this big of a stink about it and it goes through, then that means they're going to have to do something. And that could be something exciting. JDAP, thank you so much for becoming a channel member, man. I appreciate that. Shout out to all my members. New Soul 9, you're saying, MBG, to be fair, this is payback for all the years Sony made fun of Xbox. Jim better have a backup plan. Same goes for Xbox if Sony buys a publisher. Yeah, you do have to wonder how Microsoft might react if Sony were to buy a publisher, because that would definitely affect Microsoft, right? By that point, I will say, if Sony were to buy a publisher, which I don't advocate for and I wouldn't want them to do, but if they were to do that, I wonder what role that would play for PlayStation Plus, and that is the part of it that might concern Microsoft. Because again, you have to understand Microsoft's whole plan here is they want to dominate with Game Pass. They don't want Sony to compete with it, and they want to get ahead of the curve. And if it is, people say Game Pass is the future. If that's true, then that means PlayStation Plus is also the future. I don't know that I believe that. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but time will tell. OG Splinter 08, you're saying, yeah, but also MBG, you got Sony saying that they can't exist without Call of Duty. Yeah, I will admit, that's fucking ridiculous. Like, that's why I'm saying, like, look, what Microsoft is saying here is ridiculous. Sony saying that they couldn't exist or even alluding to the idea that they couldn't exist without Call of Duty. Come on. Come on. I know Sony cares about profit. I know that they don't want to lose that revenue stream, but come on. Sony, come on. That's just sad. That is sad, in my opinion. Oh wow, I'm a lot further back than I thought I was, so I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Jerome, you're saying Xbox under Sony, Sony under Nintendo, competition. All right, Jerome. Maxwell, you're saying Sony should say, F it, we're buying Square, Capcom, Bandai Namco, even EA, spending big money because Microsoft will continue buying and Sony will be left behind. Unfortunately, I don't know that Sony could even afford two of those. I mean, EA, I don't know. We've talked about that before. Bandai Namco, unlikely. Capcom, also unlikely. Again, we do have to acknowledge that these companies do have to be willing to be purchased, and not all companies are. Especially companies where things are going good. That's where I will say Microsoft targeting Bethesda and targeting Activision, they targeted companies that were on the down, going downward. So obviously they get them at a better price, you would assume. And Maxwell, you're saying, and don't give me that. Oh, okay, my bad. You're saying, and don't give me that Sony can't afford it. They have $5 billion left. Plus, the CFO has said that they will allocate a lot more money if they need to. Well, make no mistake, Maxwell. Conversations are happening at Sony. They've been happening when it comes to possibly acquiring a publisher. That's not out of the question at all. They have to have that conversation. The only thing we don't know is how, what is the potential of that actually happening? I have no idea. But you're right. Sony could afford certain publishers, and they would be willing to go out of their way to, go into debt if they felt it was necessary. So we'll see what they do, man. Space D, you're saying, I'm sorry, MBG, but you can't be against this, but at the same time be cheering for PlayStation total dominance with exclusive deals left and right. You're not wrong, Space D. You are correct. And that's the thing. I want to make it known that right now I'm not necessarily cheering for exclusivity deals. It's difficult. Like when I see a game like Silent Hill 2 Remake, I'm not going to be upset that it's PS5 exclusive. I am a PlayStation player, an enthusiast, so it's like, well, damn, that's a pretty big deal in my opinion. Game like Final Fantasy 16. Again, I'm not crying over the fact that Xbox players can't play it. But at the same time, it is one of these situations where if somebody were to tell me Microsoft would not have bought Bethesda or Activision if Sony never did this, I'd say, I don't know about that, man. Because Microsoft did still participate in this practice in the past. It just turns out that their deals didn't work out that well for them. But yeah, I agree. I'm not saying... Again, I'm not saying it's really tough because if you listen to a lot of my podcasts, you listen to my streams, I go back and forth. It seems like at times I'm for the deal, at times I'm against it. Ultimately, I hate to say it, I do end up taking a position of ultimately indifference in the sense that I do feel that I have no control over it. So no matter how for or against it I am, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to be the one to decide. I guess all I end up truly feeling when I don't do these random streams, because I don't have much else to talk about at the moment anyway. I guess I just start to feel like, I just want to focus. Ironically, I know you're going to point it out, but MBG, didn't you just talk about Microsoft practically this whole time? I know. But how I really feel is I would just like to focus on Sony. It's just that right now, like this is something that Sony is heavily involved in. You know what I mean? And even this article, even though I'm calling out something that I think is stupid that Microsoft said, it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that Sony isn't directly involved and that this isn't relevant, maybe, not maybe, but to PlayStation. It is. But that's why ultimately, I am not necessarily for or against this. I feel like, hey, I don't agree with this being the way to win. I don't. I don't agree in buying your way to victory. But I am understanding of the fact that it is business at the end of the day, and morals don't really play a part in that. It's business. It's about doing what makes the most sense for a business and for a company. I get that. But, I just kind of am. I know it may seem hard to believe. I am eager for it to end either way, though, because God, I want to see I want to see it get to a point where Xbox players and the Xbox side of things, they're just doing their thing and enjoying it, and they're excited, and that PlayStation players can be the same way. I'm telling you, this whole thing going on is getting in the way of that massively. Massively. No doubt about it. This is like the number one topic that's been dominating the gaming industry since it cropped up, and it's only been escalating. And I'm eager for it to just be over with. So Josh, you're saying LOL F Xbox, bro. Damn, Josh coming in hot here, saying they couldn't create a rival of anything for the past 10 plus years, which resulted in them firmly in last place, monopolizing the industry. I mean, it's a tough pill to swallow, but look, man, look, Josh, I'm just gonna assume you put this out here when I was in the middle of my rant. So you already know how I feel, Josh. You already know how I feel. Thank you for that. Jerome, you're saying Xbox users would love Final Fantasy, MGS, and Silent Hill. I agree. I agree that they would, but, any chance of Sony doing less exclusivity deals? No. You're only going to see Sony start to do more. We're in an arms race, people. And some people might say that Sony can't compete, but I don't know. If that's true, then I don't know why, how is Sony able to lock down games like Final Fantasy? Clearly, Sony's doing something. So, VR2, you're saying I can't see how Game Pass is value for money. At the Xbox Games event, all of the games they showed, 7 still haven't released. And this was back in 2020. Those 7 games are AAA and don't include RF and SF, meaning Redfall and Starfield. I'll be honest, I think that's one of the reasons they went for Bethesda. I think that Phil Spencer knew he kind of screwed up to a degree where they don't all these studios they bought, all these games they showed, they're not ready, and they're probably not going to be ready for a while. You think about Fable being announced in 2018 and we haven't seen anything. Where's Hellblade 2? These games are MIA. And so I think one of the reasons that Phil went and bought Bethesda is because they're like, oh, you got Redfall and Starfield and this shit's close to being ready. I mean, we could use that. And yes, they need that now. They do. Buck, you're saying MBG hold Sony's feet to the fire. They could afford to have bought Bethesda, Ninja Theory, Obsidian instead of Activision Blizzard or timed exclusives. You are correct about that, Buck. Yes. And I will say the great irony involving Sony here, in my opinion, is exactly that. I don't want it. One of the things I will be happy about when this shit is done, assuming Microsoft gets it, dude, I am so ready to see Sony not be able to just fucking throw money at Activision. I'm so ready for that. And actually, that is one side of this that makes me want Microsoft to get them. Again, I say I go back and forth here. That's one area where it's like, dude, I don't want to see Sony continue to spend money on this nonsensical exclusive marketing deal they have with Call of Duty. I don't care how many consoles it sells. It's dumb. It's just dumb. And, those are not the players that I want to see Sony focused on appealing to, frankly. Because you know what? I'm sorry. you buy a PlayStation and you just play Call of Duty, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? At least play one exclusive. At least try something. You know what I mean? That's what bothers me, because it's like Sony feels like they really need that deal to make PlayStation as popular as it is. And that's where I will admit, I feel like Sony is lacking a little bit in their own confidence, where it's like, I understand it works, but are you sure you can't still be very popular without it? You know what I mean? The Hell Slasher, you're saying, did you think when this merger was announced more than an entire year later, the entire gaming community would be exhausted with the drama that came with it? Absolutely not. No, I was made aware of the fact that this was going to take a while, but I also thought it would just kind of go through, and I didn't foresee all this nonsense. Again, I would much rather right now be talking to you about, like, a new announcement Sony made, or something they're potentially going to be doing, or at this point, I'd rather be talking about fucking rumors and leaks. I'd rather be talking about the trust me bro leaks than this. And that's the sad thing, is even that's not happening. This is all there is right now. So, I didn't think it would be like this. And that's why I'm like fantasizing about what it will be like when it's not like this anymore. Buck, you're saying MBG, Xbox's biggest flex were the documents today. They said Sony can set the retail price of Call of Duty as long as Sony pays Microsoft the wholesale price. Means Sony can raise the price on Call of Duty, or raise Call of Duty's price higher or lower than $70. Game Pass cheaper. That is interesting, Buck. That is interesting. I didn't actually catch that, but that's very fascinating if true, because, yeah, you can clearly see how Microsoft is manipulating this in a way that it's like Sony can't really maneuver in many directions. You know what I mean? They're making it difficult for Sony to maneuver in many directions without basically being put on blast. So that's a good call out, Buck. Marty Rules, you're saying that's why Sony bought Bungie too, to help with their live services, even though Bungie is staying independent. They'll still help guide Sony. Well, I hope that Sony can find a success with some of their live service games. So that way maybe they can, if anything, maybe that's why Sony has made this decision. Maybe it's the fact that Sony realizes, we've been relying so heavily on Call of Duty, which is a very popular live service game, that if we can have some of our own, we can rely more on that, and it can feed back into our own studios. So very good point. Tech Noir VR, you're saying Tony Todd just leaked Spider-Man 2 release date September. Yeah, I'm sorry I got to your super chat so late, man. Black Manta 1989, member for 27 months. You're saying I wouldn't be shocked if Sony tries to go after exclusive deals with EA for Battlefield. Games like Killzone or Resistance probably aren't coming out. Getting close with EA would be a solid move. Yeah, I could see them doing that too, Black Manta. It would be smart. Review Scientology USA, you're saying instead of Sony acquiring big-time studios, they should double their investments in their big studios. They should take a risk on opening new studios. That I agree with. I would love to see it. I know it's risky for Sony, but I don't know, man. When I think of PlayStation, when I think at the end of the day, if it all falls apart for Sony, PlayStation, if it all falls apart, the one thing that will keep everything held together are PlayStation studios. So I feel like the biggest investment absolutely should continue to be in their studios, and even making new studios. I fully believe that. New Soul 9, you're saying, MBG, remember when Jim had the audacity to say, we don't see Game Pass as a threat? Phil Spencer, oh, really, Jim? You don't say. Okay, say no more. Yeah, I get that, but we also have to acknowledge that we don't actually know if Jim said that. That was like and I'm not trying to defend Sony or Jim. I'm just saying it really was just hey, I was told Jim Ryan said this. And it's just like, I could see him saying that. Yeah, I'm not saying he didn't. It sounds like something maybe he would say, but it's difficult to continue to use that against it as like an argument when it's like, it's not in a document, can't really prove it, but I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't. I do think that truly, I will say the reason why I believe that is because I don't think Jim Ryan sees Game Pass. I don't think Jim Ryan sees Game Pass as truly like competition. I think he does see it as a as something that basically could do what it's doing now, which is take away some of their profits. KD, you're saying, what's up, MBG? Long time. Couple of things here. Sony cares about parity BS. Look at what happened with Psychonauts 2. I don't know what exactly happened with Psychonauts 2. I mean, look, I don't deny for a second that maybe Sony is BSing their way through some of this. I mean, how much does Sony really care about parity? I don't know. Like, I think Sony might be just leveraging that to a certain degree to try to, again, like, hey, regulators, they could do this, and might make the regulators go, yeah, I guess they could. But in reality, Sony's probably like, I mean, what are they really going to do? Are they going to give us a broken version of Call of Duty? I mean, I don't know about that. I don't know. Buck, you're saying ABK made COD 23 Premium to get out of the Sony deal faster. Oh, yeah, that could be. Now Sony and ABK marketing expires 1 year after releases in 2024 instead of 2025. Sony pissed off ABK. Yeah, you know what? I didn't think of that. That's really funny. I'm okay with that too. I'm telling you, I'm going to be happy to see the Call of Duty marketing go. I know Sony, ruse that day. I get it, but I'm excited for that because it's like I'm tired of seeing it, man. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of seeing Sony always plastering Call of Duty everywhere on PlayStation. Gets annoying. Senu.com, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly. You're saying Destiny is a lifetime non-exclusive. Bad idea for Microsoft. Sampo, you're saying, will we see Deviations or Firewalk's game first? I think we're going to see Firewalk's game first, because last I heard, apparently theirs was in a playable state. KD, you're saying the fact that no Bethesda games reported the VR2 should explain why Sony is concerned with Microsoft buying Activision. Bethesda is the biggest VR publisher. That's a good point, KD. Not something I really thought about. But that is a fact. Yeah, that is true, man. I'm glad you brought this up because I don't think I've heard VR2 mentioned at all within this. Interesting. Josh, you're saying the power move is buying publishers the Hail Mary. Timothy, you're saying Phil Spencer has to crack the whip at Xbox. Carlos, you're saying I thought this was a PlayStation channel. I know, man. I know. I thought so too. It is. No worries. I'm going to get back to regularly scheduled content tomorrow. New Soul 9, you're saying MBG, if you are funding something, you are part of that development of that game. I guess you're right about that. Yeah, I guess you're right about that. True. You can't have a game without the funding. Can't argue that, New Soul 9. I can't argue that. Buck, you're saying 2023, saltiest year for MBG. Sony by ABK. Know you elated. Is 2023 the saltiest year for MBG? It might be. I don't know, man. It might be. I wouldn't be surprised. It very well might be. Because I'm clearly still sitting here talking about it. And Biggity08, you're saying, I'm a casual Xbox fan, but I also have a PS5. I like the first-party games, but most casuals don't mind that much. We like day one Game Pass. That is true, and I understand that. I get it. I know. I'm not ignorant to the casual market and how important the casual market is to both Sony and Xbox. It's just difficult for me to care too much about the casual market because I feel that in some ways the casual market can really, bring the worst out of video games, and I'm not saying that if you're a casual gamer, that's you necessarily. It's just that, and I'm not trying to be a gatekeeper, but I do think that we have seen in the past that the casualization, like the further it goes, the more we kind of see how it can be pretty bad at times. It can result in things that actually push the more core gamers away, and we don't want to see that. But anyway, guys, I think that's going to do it for the stream. I'll be honest, the stream went on for way longer than I wanted it to. And I'm aware that some of my rambling may have been a bit, and my rants may have been a bit incoherent. So I do apologize for that. I feel like sometimes I go in these directions and I have points I want to make, and then I get sidetracked. And then before I know it, I didn't actually make a point. But I do think that there are some things for sure that I did get the point across, and I made the point that I was trying to make um, over the course of this stream. True Witty, you're saying what happened? What did Microsoft do for the stream? Well, I'm about to end it, man. So you'll have to come back and watch it. I'd appreciate it if you do that. And yeah, I want to take a moment before I head out to. I see some people are saying they're just joining. I apologize, guys, for anybody who's just joining. I am about to end the stream. I do want to thank everybody. Anybody who donated a super chat. Sorry, my face is being cut off there. Anybody who joined and donated a super chat, I really appreciate that. I couldn't do what I do here without your support, guys. So it really means a lot. And I'll be honest with you, we probably will touch on this topic again, but not till Sunday. And the good news about me doing the stream now is for anybody who is fearful that the podcast is simply going to be dominated by a single Activision Blizzard topic, well, since we talked about it a lot here, that will ensure that that doesn't happen. We're definitely going to have other things to talk about. At least I hope we do. But thank you guys so much for your support. Do me one favor, hit that like button on your way out, and I will have regularly scheduled content coming tomorrow. Thank you guys. I hope to enjoy the rest of my evening as well. I hope you do too. And that does it, guys. I'll catch you guys tomorrow. Until then, take care.